Right. You're listening to the July 31st edition of Update on the War in Ukraine. My name is Jim Dingman. I'm joined here with Frank Radford, Mark Whittam, Daryl McPherson, and Aaron Reyes, uh, and Ted Cook. Uh, we're going to start with some uh, discussions of some of the general news that's going on around the world right now before we get into the events of the past 2 days. And I wanted to start with there's a new book out, and I'm just gonna go briefly with this. This is something we're all familiar with. This book is a book by a retired climate scientist at the London School of Economics, University of London, and basically he's arguing in his new book, Hot House Earth, that everything is too far advanced to turn. The record-breaking heat waves, the lethal flooding, extreme weather events that are going on are just we've just not paid enough attention to it, and now we're reaping the whirlwind.
Yep.
And one of the things interesting about his commentary here, he teaches at the university. He's an emeritus professor at the University College of London, um, which is a great institution. It's like
Great.
integrated right near the British Museum in London. If you ever go to London, it's like they're all sort of in that same area along with LSE, London School of Economics. And his argument is that as we head further into 2022, it's already a different world out there. Soon it will be unrecognizable to every one of us. And I raise that because we know that this is an issue that's hotly debated in the United States, hotly debated in the world. There's been criticism over the defeat of the Build Back Better plan, and I know we have a Build Back Better plan, pequeño style, minor style, that just came through the Senate, and we'll see whether it passes and is written into law. About I think it was a 730 billion, certainly not the estimate that Mr. Biden wanted, but we'll see what happens. And his book essentially is going over issues that we're all pretty familiar with in this group. Now, let me uh, go into another aspect of this internationally, and this is the reaction of China to the visit of Nancy Pelosi. Now, as we know, this is it's a pretty interesting commentary to actually say if we encounter. I don't know who actually said this. We're at the level of whether it's Defense Ministry in the PRC said this, but they said they would shoot her down.
Yeah.
You know,
Wow.
and that was sort of interesting. And so I cannot see that the United States is going to back down from plopping her into Taiwan at some point.
Number three in the hierarchy in the United States. It would just
Exactly. I
Right.
mean,
Wow.
actually,
Wow.
she's not going, guys. I mean, I think it's pretty clear. We're not. We have no interest in. We have this integrated deterrence model, which is all these.
We'll find out.
We will
Yeah.
find out, will we? Will we not? Because I cannot see us. They actually have a military exercise going on right now, the Chinese, and
The
I
Taiwanese.
personally cannot see the United States not going there. I just find that. I mean, now they may sneak her in and have a little TV appearance, but on the other hand, Xi Jinping has warned that this is I mean, almost to the point of it being a casus belli. So I don't know. I mean, what do people think about this?
The outrageous. Yeah, maybe you should visit Quimoy Matsu and the Pescadores. I remember that from Kennedy. Those little islands just off the coast that they could attack at any time, which I've never taken. That was the Chinese could sort of
All
show
right.
their force without having to invade the whole big island. They could take the little islands.
All right. Any
Those
other
islands
comments
aren't
on this,
important, though.
Frank?
I think she's backed down. I think we've backed down, to tell you the truth.
yeah.
So it seems that even though China's now got the Fujian, which is the new aircraft carrier, and
Love to see it.
the arguments have been made that China's not really quite ready to do anything. Nevertheless, we've seen it as the best course of action not to do anything. I'm not sure if that really was wise, but if it's bipartisan and they were yelling at the doors for her to go in, But again, it's close to the midterms. It's up in the air, really. It's not a good optic for her not to go. But that's there's serious politics about trade, so I'm not sure. I don't have the answer, that's for sure.
Hey, Jim.
Yeah, go on.
One aspect, I mean, it's more of a question than a comment, but anytime you're dealing with, and maybe Ted could talk about this because he knows about the Japanese, but also with the Chinese, saving face is a big deal. You don't kind of shove it in their faces and expect, any good results per se. I don't know if this is the hill we want to die on per se, or is it something that if we back down, they ante and say, well, now you can't do X, Y, Z or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, good. I mean, that just shows you the dilemmas of the whole thing. Anybody else before we move on
Well,
this
just-
one, Daryl or Aaron?
I mean, this is an own goal. It's pretty simple. Like this, this speaks to like nothing's coordinated and people are just entrepreneurial about their approach. So, once the speaker basically made a commitment that clearly wasn't coordinated with national policy.
Well, we
then
don't know that, Aaron. We don't know that. I mean, I hear your point.
Okay.
We don't know that.
At the end of the day, when she doesn't go and we self-punked ourselves for something we didn't even need to do, or if we're going to do it, we could just do it. That speaks to policy incoherence. I mean, I don't think that's rocket science on that one. That we self-created this. Like, I mean, if you were going to design it, would you make it look like this right now in the news cycle? I don't think so. I mean, there would be some support for her on this trip, or there would have been a quick, change in approach very early. You wouldn't have dragged this on into this sort of mush after a week of these news cycles that everyone's sitting here saying, I don't know what she's doing. I don't know what we're going to do. Like that is it. That's coherent. I mean, that's incoherence by definition, isn't it?
All right.
One can't argue with the incoherence part. But I don't exactly know why the speaker would be making her own foreign policy, and that would assume that she is. And I'm not at all sure that's the case. This might have been something that's been thought through for a long time, and it might be let's see what they do.
Yeah.
Or putting a marker down where we're trying to say, look, we can do what we want to. We don't have to sail aircraft carriers to the Strait. We can send a woman from California. We'll just send her in and see what that does to your imagery of complete dominance over Taiwan. You see, the problem here for China is that there is no solution. They can claim it all they want to, but they have to conquer it to make it theirs. And to conquer it would destroy it, so it would be of no value. So it's all symbols. And I don't know. I agree with the idea of it's hard to back down. I mean, Xi has put himself in this terrible position, and if they're threatening to shoot her down, and somebody tried it, that would be casus belli for us.
Yeah, exactly. See, that's why I think the United States is going to sneak her in, and again, that will be viewed negatively by many in certainly some in the United States will view that as escalatory. But on the other hand, for actually them to say that they're going to shoot her down, I have to say that's a little bit of a red line. Go on, Frank.
That's why we have submarines.
Yeah, right. Go on, Frank.
Well, I mean, there's a number of issues going on here. First of all, obviously China's peer-to-peer, especially around the South China Sea. And our Navy at the moment sounds like it's stressed. We got I think it's the Truman and the Sixth Fleet in the Ionian Sea. And from what I hear, just to maintain the Article 5 and doing the patrols, they're doing like 80 sorties a day. So they're stressed. You're starting to, if you're going to back Taiwan at this particular moment, the question is, was this thought through? I would suggest that this is a Pelosi kind of action to show that, yeah, we're a democracy and we've our own different separate opinions, and so there. Not sure whether it's a State Department or it's a it's a Joint Chiefs Department of Defense decision. Again, it does not seem to be well thought through. But then again, we need to back Taiwan in certain ways. We need to do something concrete, and this would definitely be that. And whether or not we have the advantage at the moment because of the failure of Putin in Ukraine, and therefore this hypothetical alliance between Putin and Xi Jinping is somewhat on the rocks, because Xi Jinping, in my opinion, is looking at Putin and saying, "Why did you do this? This was not as it was supposed to have happened." So maybe there are conflicting arguments going on within the administration. If we don't go in, I think Republicans are going to play on this to the max. And if Pelosi doesn't go in, to the max. But either way, it's as Aaron's saying, it seems to be a lose-lose.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't agree. I think that I can't believe that they would have something as high profile, sending the Speaker of the House to go into a situation that is internationally volatile, given all the things going on in the world and how interconnected increasingly Russia and China are. I can't believe that this would not have been looked on as sort of a low level, it's on a lower level of political gesture than sending a carrier group. Now, I'm showing right here, this is one of the advantages of these Russian, pro-Russian websites, is they sort of do keep track of the flow of U.S. carrier groups.
Yeah, that's
So you
good.
can
That's great
see
now.
that there is CBN 76, which is the, let's see, I think that's the Ronald Reagan,
That's the Reagan, yeah,
76.
Reagan.
That's the Ronald Reagan that's down in the South China Sea
That's
right
based
now.
out of Japan normally.
Right. Is that? Yeah, that's the one at Yokosuka. And then here coming in theater is the Abraham Lincoln. And it's participating in a exercise, I guess RIMPAC 2022. That's one of those big exercises the North Koreans and the Chinese and the Russians always get annoyed about. Defending, having joint exercises of all different fleets out here. And then you have this carrier group here, which is the, let's see, that's the Harry Truman. That's in the Aegean Sea, or the Gulf of Adriatic, supporting operations. It's there, obviously, to signal U.S. resolve, end quote, in the situation in Ukraine. And the other carriers are all back here. And it looks like the group composed of the George Washington is now, oh no, that's in an overhaul. So that's being overhauled right now. And everything else is at home port. So that's the quote, stasis strategic, because, always, these are the equivalents of deploying dreadnought battleships.
Right, exactly. This is carrying their stuff. Yeah,
Exactly.
both sides do it. Yeah,
Where they're going to
So-
exercise.
we got a lot more
indirect
stuff than they do. That's the problem.
I also don't think shooting down her plane is a red line, actually. I mean, there'd be a whole bunch of bluster for a month.
Oh,
two.
come on.
Well, no. Let's scenario this out. Are we going to launch thousands of cruise missiles and basically start a full-scale conventional war against China if they shot down her plane? No, we're not. We would go crazy. The media would play it 24/7 for 3 weeks. Everyone would give speeches. We'd move a whole bunch of forces all around in circles. But in the end, when push comes to shove,
We'd probably take out the Spratlys and the Paracels, and we could do that quite easily. I mean,
well, when we say take them out, are we saying we would launch operations killing thousands of PLN and PLA forces? I don't think we would do that, actually.
Well, and we can put them out. We can put them out of commission because they got runways.
Fine.
runways
So
are
that's what we would do. We would
Right.
hammer a whole bunch of empty
We would do something.
spaces. Yes.
we would definitely do something.
But when you're talking about knocking out number 3, there wouldn't be their number 3 or collective group of number 3 or probably 3,000 that would actually be touched. Because at the end of the day, both of our dominant political parties as constructed now are in essence anti-war parties. And we, for different reasons, but ultimately it equals the same thing, which is.
Well, wait a minute. You have to assume one thing, and that is
Mhm.
that this is a global economy, and
Uh-huh.
and Chinese investments in the United States are real and massive.
Of course.
And we have to assume that in China, there are those who would definitely, and on the Politburo, who would say to the military, the PLAN, do not do this. And
Oh, I agree. But if it
I mean,
happened,
but that's
Well,
that's the calculation that we have to have behind putting Pelosi into Taiwan.
yeah,
It's
because
That's realistic.
But Frank, I think this is our equivalent of using Pelosi as sort of politically like in here we're signaling we're going to send the Speaker of the House, and that shows our determination to have our policy towards Taiwan, and we're going to sneak her in there come hell or high water, and now the United States is going to fly her in some sort of way that fakes out the Chinese, and that's what they're going to do. I can't see.
but isn't that the whole point, that we have to go play these charade and kabuki theater games because ultimately we're afraid of a kinetic response, whether accidentally or not, and because ultimately we would not counter that response outside of you're totally right, Frank. We'd find a whole bunch of empty spaces the Chinese plant flags on and hammer those into the ground. But I mean, ultimately, there won't be dead battalions and regiments of Chinese forces. Right. And if we knocked out number 3 of China because they were visiting Cuba, the Chinese would not be like, well,
it could escalate to a point where we took out one of their aircraft carriers, that would be
There's no way we will do that. The Biden administration or the Trump administration are not doing that. That ship is sailed.
All right, Aaron, you may be right, but I don't want to linger on this because we could spend an hour or 2 hours arguing. So go on, Daryl. What were you going to say? Go on, Daryl.
Just really quickly. When this thing first came up, the Joint Chiefs asked her not to go. The State Department asked her not to go. I'm trying to figure out what was the genesis and what this is all about. Because nobody wanted her to go.
Well, because there's a very strong Taiwanese American community in San Francisco in the Bay Area, and and that's real. I mean, that's not fake, and we're not talking about a couple hundred people here. We're talking tens of thousands of people. We have probably close to at least 100,000 realistically, and it's not just the cumulative numbers, right? It's the generational numbers, it's the mindset. It's like a version nowhere near as
Cuba,
rambunctious and yeah, exactly, and boisterous as Cuba, because the music isn't as good in Taiwan as Cuba. But the bottom line is that it's the same kind of cultural identity.
There's also something else. And that is TSMC invested $12 billion in Arizona to build semiconductor factory. I mean, there may have been conditions to that.
There is.
It's okay, we need more recognition.
Right.
Well, no, the big thing is the semiconductor bill.
Exactly.
Which,
very good.
Is basically tied into that. I mean, I work in industrial, and so a lot of decisions are not saying they're being held up, but they are being let's say calibrated might be the right way to put it, around when people can optimize, right? Because everyone does this. And so that's where you're seeing that. And there's a pass through in the Bay Area because all those companies, so when you expand a semiconductor plant, 80% of the equipment that's used is either from Taiwan or from the Bay Area, like when you're talking about like the instrumentation equipment. And so it's all tied together in this sort of Taiwan mush, but I'm sure she has staff members from her, community, and they've been goosing her for years on this, and she probably felt like this is the time to do it, and it wasn't the most coordinated approach, but that's sort of where it is.
Right. Okay. So let's move on. I mean, this is of course going to stay with us, and that issue of the semi chips. We'll get back to that later. Now, what's interesting is here is a exhibit of art
That's
going through
great.
Europe right now. It's
It's a
called
copy of a Japanese style. I've seen that same kind of face in Japan.
interesting, around
Amazing.
Hiroshima, right?
Yeah, no, but just that particular art. Sorry, that particular art format. There's a couple of. I'm not saying he's copying it, but because it's obviously a face. But there's a Japanese artist who's been doing this for many years. This very similar to this. Yeah.
Well, anyway, and interesting. We bring up Hiroshima. It looks like there's a memoir published of a combat photographer who was in Hiroshima in the aftermath of the dropping of the bomb. A new book talking about the footage that he shot, which I saw when it was broadcast at the Museum of Modern Art many years ago, and it was basically raw footage that was
Yeah,
done.
very good stuff.
It was done. It was extraordinarily powerful to watch. I mean, you couldn't say anything afterwards. It was like literally acres and acres of skeletons, and there was a particularly poignant part where they showed a bunch of a school where all the kids had basically been disintegrated. It was very powerful. But we'll talk about this. So here's this exhibit going on right now in Europe. It opened up in Brussels, and it's essentially, Ukrainian artists sending their portrayal of what they think is going on into the West. And the pictures. There's 50 artists in the exhibit. This is, by the way, to represent all the kids that are killed in the Ukrainian war. And there is another. Look at this. I can't really blow it up, but this is a interesting little piece, embroideries, and you can see, like, here in the background, missile launchers, helicopters, jets, someone firing a manpad, etc. And this artist put this together. And so this is an exhibit that's traveling in the West, and who knows, it might wind up in the United States. It's supposed to go all throughout Europe, and then it's going to go to New York, Washington, and San Francisco next year. So we'll probably see it at either the Whitney or the Museum of Modern Art next year in New York City. Now, I wanted to show you something which I thought was rather powerful. This is a Twitter feed. This is one of these pro-Russian Twitter feeds. This is one of the guys named Suryak who basically shows this. But as you can see, I'm going to show this. This is a little village there in the Ukraine, but look at it. It's completely obliterated.
Wow.
Totally obliterated. A drone shot of the entire village, fought over, and as you can see from the shot, the entire village is destroyed. Again, like we talk about World War I before we started the broadcast today, we're talking about the psychological effects of bombardment on troops, let alone the civilian population. But as you can see, this complete village is destroyed.
Hey, Jim.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of a question. I'm wondering, overall in Eastern Ukraine, wherever the Russians have conquered, how many people are left? Have they evacuated? Are the Russians ruling over large amounts of Ukrainian populations?
That's a great point.
And as a kind of an adjacent question, when it comes to eventually, or the possibility of partisan warfare, wouldn't the Ukrainians need a local population within which they can hide?
Very true. And then if they're being obliterated, it sort of reminds you of the kind of thing one read. What's that famous article by Samuel Huntington in Foreign Affairs in 1970, I believe, when he discussed I guess has coined the term forced urbanization regarding the search and destroy missions of the U.S. military in Vietnam, basically depopulating the countryside, taking the sea away from the fish.
Exactly.
Fish
Well,
is
that was
Mao. Yeah,
a
exactly.
Mao quote. Yeah.
Exactly, and I know that there's we'll talk about this. There's actual examples of resistance, but who knows whether that's just special operations guys operating the field in the rear, because we know that in all these areas they're integrating them and trying to put them into the Federation of Russia. But that's a great point, Mark.
Isn't that? I mean, isn't that what the British did in Singapore? I forget what that was called.
Malaya?
Say it again.
In Malaya, yeah, that's right.
I'm sorry, did I say Singapore? Yeah, I meant
Yeah.
Malaya. Yeah, against the communists. And the Americans tried the same thing. It had a name to it. I forget what it was called. Not something villages. And it just the American version failed. Well, the British.
It was called the Strategic Hamlet Program.
That's it. Thank you.
Um,
Yeah.
And but Ben, but we weren't theoretically. We weren't. What I just showed you was a completely obliterated. Yeah, go on, Ted.
No, on this point, no, that was a very interesting thing. Are they claiming that's a victorious, that's a liberated village, or is that,
I don't know.
what happens to you if you don't agree with us? Because it's that symbolic. It is absolutely true, and I was shocked myself. I have to say, yesterday when we suddenly have the president of Ukraine calling for people to leave the area to save their lives. Because that is sort of draining his own sea if you're going to run a guerrilla war. At the same time, it also shows a concern to put emphasis on the fact that the Russians are blowing up, or the Russian allies are blowing up the country that they're supposedly want to rule over. And so it makes no sense in any way. And if you're living in that situation, if that's your village and you've evacuated, that's one thing. But if that was your village and half your family was killed in it, and all the men are sort of in the armed forces, I mean, it's a very difficult position to brag on. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm going to go through today's summary of the news in the Ukraine. This is The Guardian, of course. And here, the Ukrainian officials have denounced a call by Russia's embassy in Britain for fighters from the Azov regiment to face a humiliating execution. I believe a spokesperson there, or the ambassador in the UK, made a comment that the Azov regiment should basically be executed,
hanged,
and hanged, etc. And as you know, there was this incident just a few 2 days ago where a POW compound was actually destroyed by either air. I think it was destroyed. They're claiming it's destroyed, but there was a POW rebellion, or they destroyed it with aircraft. And they showed the pictures of the dead, basically blown apart, burned to death, etc. And that, of course, is a reaction. The Azov regiment, had a little reaction with the video. They said, Putin, we're to come and execute you. That was yesterday. So it's this back and forth on this, because we know when they captured those guys at Mariupol, this kind of stuff was going to occur. Now here you have again these strikes on the Russian front line in the Ukraine have left one person dead in the south of the country. And remember, the Ukrainians are bombarding Donetsk. They're attacking targets. The Russian media, of course, emphasizes that when civilians get killed in the bombardment of that's going on in the Donetsk Oblast. Now, and yes, you see, here's Zelensky calling for the withdrawal of the eastern Donetsk region. And here, again, we're going to spend a little more time on this later, on this whole question, what's going on, but they're claiming 2 ammo dumps have been knocked out in the Kherson region. And then Gazprom, now here you have the Russians exerting their political influence through the gas supply. They've cut gas deliveries to Europe via the Nord Stream pipeline on Wednesday to about 20% of its capacity. And that has had the impact, and here you see they've cut off supplies to Latvia. Now the Russians have banned 32 New Zealand officials from entering the country. And the ambassador to the United Nations said on Friday there should be no longer any doubt that Russia intended to dismantle the Ukraine. MI6 reports that the Russians are running out of steam. And then you have this question of Olenivka, which is where I was referring to, where these 50 POWs were killed. And the Russians are claiming the Ukrainians did it to create a false flag, you know. And now you have the question of this, whether they're going to export the grain exports out of the ports in the south. But the Ukrainians are making, a big deal about this because, of course, it is, from their point of view, a horrific war crime committed against their captured troops. Now, there was a strike today in Odessa, or Sevastopol, where a drone hit the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol. Here you have this announcement of evacuation of the Eastern Donetsk region, and Latvia is condemning the killing of these POWs at Olenivka, and here's the question of the flow of fighting. Bakhmut is threatened. We know where that is on the map. We're going to get into that in detail a little later. And here is Reuters talking about strike near Mykolaiv. Now, we're going to also talk about that later. It seems like the Russians are concentrating forces around Mykolaiv to counterattack or offset the offensive against Kherson. And here is, Lukashenko continues to follow Moscow's lines on the Ukraine. He states on the 21st of July that Ukraine must accept Russia's demands for the war to stop. So he, of course, is proving to be a loyal ally to Putin. Now, the issue of the Ukrainian harvest being under threat is pretty serious, and that's being announced as a possible problem. Then the question of the drone attack, which was quite a sight to see. And let's just go to the next day, further into the news today, to the most recent news. Here is, let's see. So Putin has said the Russian Navy will receive hypersonic Zircon cruise missiles within the next 5 months. And remember, there's been examples of hypersonic weapons being used. They can travel at 9 times the speed of sound, and there were test launches of the Zircon from warships and submarines last summer. The first grain exporting ship could leave Ukraine's ports on Monday. And here you have someone killed in the bombardment in the Mykolaiv area. Oleksiy Volodorsky killed with his wife in a bombardment by the Russians. And here's some of the pictures of the firefighting in Mykolaiv over the weekend. Here's this question when we look at that FIRMS data. Here's a fire in the wheat field in the Donetsk region caused by Russian shelling. So we're going to show you some of the FIRMS data, but of course, the point was raised by several people, you can't assume that's all artillery bombardments. Now, this is interesting that today Putin has signed a new document setting out a new maritime strategy. And this is no surprise. The doctrine says the main threat to Russia is the strategic policy of the United States to dominate the world's oceans and the movement of the NATO military alliance closer to Russia's borders. And that's how they're, of course, reacting. Now, here is this tribute that Zelensky played to Alexei Volodorsky, who was killed in the bombardment of Mykolaiv. I just mentioned him. He was a owner of a grain-producing factory, and he was killed in a bombardment by the Russians. And here is this. Now they're actually admitting that the Russians are sending troops down into the south because they're fearful of an offensive against the occupied territories in the Ukraine to retake them back. And here are those shots of the terrible chaos of battle. And here is the question repeated again of Donetsk having to be evacuated. Let me just go down the bottom here. Now here is this prison before the shelling. This is the prison where those 50 plus, predominantly, I don't know what units they're from. They were claiming most of them for the Azov division. Because remember, we were talking about the size of the Azov division. It's now a division-sized force of over 10,000 troops. There's the prison before the shelling, so they're claiming it's shelling, and here it is after the shelling. You can see it basically got clobbered here by artillery. That shot and this shot. Now, the Russians are claiming that the building was attacked by Ukraine, and of course, the Ukrainians are claiming it was attacked by them. I tend to, having seen other shots of this today, my inclination is to think that the Russians did this, but we can find out. Who knows? One can be surprised. And here's the areas around Bakhmut of bombardment. The eastern part of it was attacked today, which means the Russians are moving closer to take the city. Here is the shelling inside various targets in the Ukraine. This is the Irish president urging that there be unequivocal support for the Ukrainian cause and opposition to the Russian aggression. And here's some of the pictures of sorrow in the southern Ukraine. Forest fire raging near Mykolaiv, similar to elsewhere. And here are the Ukrainians trying to knock it out, stop it. And let's go back. And here is more news here. This is the latest news, and we've gone over this just beforehand. Now the International Red Cross is condemning Russia for this attack. They want to investigate it, and they're not being allowed to go in there. The American ambassador to Ukraine has condemned it, and we're having incidents here of shipping through the Danube Delta being impeded, but this looks like it's just a simple collision, not a military action. And here you have an interesting question. Now, what does one make of this? 200 Russian Marines from the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade refused to come back to fight in the southern regions of Ukraine. Now, when you read the reports, there's all these reports of combat refusal on both sides of the aisle here, and this was, you can see this in all these different postings and Twitter feeds. But that's sort of interesting that that's being reported, and finally, just to go over this part of it, does anybody have any comments about this news that we're looking at in the actual war itself in the past few days? Okay.
I mean, I think, are you referring to sort of the this idea of a counteroffensive in Kherson?
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. I'm
Okay.
just referring to that was sort of
Yeah, but
what I was more or less talking about was Ukraine specific.
the killing
type
of
of news.
the killing of the prisoners, or the assassination, the accidental or deliberate killing of them by the Ukrainians themselves. There were a couple of clips on today. I think there was one through a BBC also that showed, that one person was being critical not only of the fact that we'd seen before that the beds were still too well organized to have been blown up. There were all the dead bodies that were cremated there, but there were also the fact there was no explosive shrapnel.
Yeah,
In
exactly.
the building, in the roof. You saw that one?
Yeah.
And that was, I think maybe that was. Did you post that, Aaron? But anyway,
Yeah, I did. I mean, there's no way those were MRLS.
That was definitely not what they claimed it was. It's not that it wouldn't be possible for the Ukrainians to have shelled it. It would be highly unlikely, but it's much more likely that the Russians just deliberately did it.
And it's funny, I know earlier I was looking at something that Alex had sent about Colonel McGregor, Doug McGregor,
Uh-huh.
who, as we know, was selected in the latter stages of the Trump administration to be, I guess an assistant secretary of defense. Someone can refresh my memory as to what he actually did. And it's sort of always sort of weird to watch Doug being trotted out, going on Fox. Because, I met him, some of us, I mean, I'm sure Ted may have heard him. I don't know if Frank did. But I remember when he came back from the Gulf War, he was part of McMaster's Armored Cavalry Regiment that McMaster was in when they had to fight at 73 Easting. So it's always hard to watch McGregor, turn into, sort of a Putin defender, no doubt about it, in terms of his stance. And Alex had sent something about him basically saying, once again, they're going to collapse soon, the Ukrainians are. But again, just the story is interesting. And Doug is a good historian. He did a very good book on the Normandy campaign. But I haven't seen Doug since the FDR event at Hofstra University in the early 90s. So that's a long time ago. Anyway, so let's get back to this. So here is, I'm just going to go through the flow of fighting for the past 2 days. These are maps from various sources. I'm going to spend a little time on Friday because we sort of, we sort of did do some of the discussions on Friday. Excuse me, this is the 28th. So here's this question of, they're raising in the MI6 or the Joint Intelligence Committee of the Brits, the strikes against these various targets on the Dnieper River. And particularly that Antonivsky Bridge that was hit by HIMARS. And here is the pictures on the 29th. We went over some of this just to sort of refresh one's memory. There's the situation across the Dnieper River, and as you can see, these various bridges have been knocked out by the Ukrainians. There's this bridge is functioning here, and they knocked out this. There's only one bridge here, and this is showing the areas where the Ukrainians are attacking the Russians towards Kherson. So the ability of cross-lateral communication across these two areas is basically knocked out by the Ukrainian bombardments. This is fighting on the 29th around Kharkiv, as you can see, in the northern part of the fighting. And then, no, excuse me, I'm wrong. This is around Izium, actually. Yeah, this is around good old Izium. And look at this area here. There's a very large. This is an indication of offensive operations by the Russians to the west of the Izium salient. So obviously, some sort of operation is being mounted by the Russians, aiming at this direction. This is I think we did look at this. This is when the General Staff issued that commentary about Olenivka, about where those POWs were killed. And here you have operations now developing around Donetsk. There was, as you can see, there's multi-battalion attacks around Donetsk on the 29th of this month. Now, you can ignore all those little sarcastic comments here about premium meat, but here you have fighting again along the severe Donetsk down to Bakhmut areas, and here you have fighting to the south of it, heading towards the Donetsk salient, which is off this map here. This fighting's been going on and off around these areas for weeks. Here's Andriivka, which is a pretty heavily I've seen actually overhead photographs of it, pretty heavily fortified. Now this is interesting. It's on the 29th. Now, obviously, some of these might be fires due to climate change in the rear. These are all. This area is among the most productive in terms of wheat production in the Ukraine. However, again, look at all the concentration of the shifting of fire. We showed this a few days ago, but this is the back and forth in the rear areas of fire incidents occurring, and not all of them are due to climate change. And in particular, that concentration I showed you. Here's Melitopol, and here is here's that river that is severed in terms of lateral lines of communication. Look at the fire going on here south of Zaporizhia. Basically, whatever they're targeting or whatever their fires are. Again, it's hard to discern that. They're not making a distinction, but that I wanted to show that because that's sort of interesting, that concentration of fires or artillery barrages or missile barrages. Now here again is the barrages of artillery on the 29th. Incidents of shelling reported by the Ukrainians. And here is the fighting again, showing that fighting near Andriivka, and a attack over in this direction by the Russians. And just repeat, that's the fighting around Donetsk that we started off with. We're going to see that evolve a little bit more extensively the next day. And here's the fighting again around the Izium salient on the 29th. Now let's go to the 30th, and let's see what's this. Oh yeah. Now here is again, how does one define this? Is it accurate? Is it not? This is a report of shifting of troops to the Kherson front. So what we're seeing here is a report by Ukrainian open sources that the Russians are shifting around 14 battalion tactical groups into the area of Crimea, including 5 BTGs from the 76th Airborne Division, and they're increasing UAV flights. They're shifting heavy artillery, 203 millimeter. Those are those big SP guns, the biggest they got, and all sorts of equipment being shifted into the area around Kherson to deal with what's going on from the Ukrainians. And this is fighting on the 29th. This is, Alex. Oh, Alex is here. Good. And this is what's going on the 30th. Again, intensive. Now, again, keep in mind we're making, we can make our judgments about what's really happening here in terms of the fires. Is it artillery, whatever? But that's the map showing fires and artillery as of the 30th. Now let me go further down here. Let's see. Let's get out of here. Okay. And here is the, now this is interesting. This is a map showing the depth of the Russian forces as of the 30th down towards the Crimea. Because they're implying that the Ukrainians are mounting offensives. You see, coming into theaters, all these troops to reinforce this area. And so they're actually showing, here's the 76th Airborne Division up here, already across the Dnieper, and reinforcing the troops that are fighting against the Ukrainians in this area. And then that's a pretty sizable force in reserve in the Crimea itself. It's going to be hard for the Ukrainians. Ukrainians, I doubt, would have the ability to retake the Crimea, given the, look at that, it's a pretty large force down there in the Crimea, defending it. it looks like at least a division plus of troops. And that's a lot of battalion tactical groups down there, of all types and all sorts of different kinds of weapon systems. Again, here is the artillery barrages as of the 30th, yesterday, all along the front. And here's interesting. Now, this is the creation of a new separatist army corps. Remember, there was the 1st and 2nd Army Corps of the, one was associated with the Luhansk People's Republic, the other one was associated with the Donetsk People's Republic. Here is a 3rd Army Corps that, again, is openly associated with those two entities, except it's not identified as under the command of, it's not like a Donetsk LPR or a Luhansk Luhansk Army Corps. It's a Army Corps formed from people from those separatist areas, but it's not, quote, attached to some People's Republic. And this is this Army Corps that is coming in stream right now as a separate force. And, you know, an Army Corps, of course, in Russian parlance, this looks like a heavy reinforced division with 1, 2, 3 separate motorized rifle regiments, a tank regiment, and a artillery regiment. And then look, it has a lot of support troops. Now, whether these are all new troops, I don't know. Whether this is a completely newly organized force, I don't know. But I offer that to you because this sort of plopped up there out of the blue, and I sort of looked at it. I said, interesting. Here's an order of battle. This corps that's now being employed in the fighting. Here's the fighting. What part of the front is this? Yeah, that's here's the old. This is around Severodonetsk. Seversk. And again, this is a pro-Ukrainian map. Okay, this guy does, you know, he's unabashedly in favor of Ukraine. Here is a tactical action a little further south. I believe this is around Bakhmut. They're fighting over that big reservoir. This has been going on for a while. This map shows that the fighting is still going on, although they have captured most of the reservoir. The Russian maps show that they're actually advancing and they're already into this area of Kadima, which I'll show you in a minute where that is in relationship to the map. It's actually to the south of Bakhmut, over here off the map. And here's fighting around Bakhmut. And Kodima, here you can see Kodima on the map down there. Let me blow it up. This is yesterday. So again, the Russian maps show that they're basically on the verge of cutting this road off. The Ukrainians' maps show that they're containing them and they have not taken this area of Kodima. And here you have Bakhmut. Now again, there was a report today that they're in the eastern part of Bakhmut, which would mean that somewhere in here they're actually fighting. And look, Bakhmut's sort of a pretty well-sized little town here, but it's the anchor of that line that was reestablished after the fall of Lysychansk and Severodonetsk. And this is sort of interesting. This is the bilateral aid to Ukraine and how it's affected. What's the share of their GDP since the 16th of June? So you can see, of course, the United States has pumped in a lot of stuff, but so has all these other countries. Denmark, this is obviously military equipment they've given. Germany's sort of low on the totem pole there.
Well, yeah, and if you break that out by military equipment, Germany is like at the bottom. I mean,
Right.
literally almost sent nothing militarily there.
And there's the Czechs. That's, I believe, they've sent them tanks and aircraft. Portugal's pretty high too. Look at that. That's interesting. 565 million. But anyway, and the United States, this is a low figure here because we're number one in terms of giving them equipment, and so is the UK. But this is more. This is interesting. They're interblending economic aid here, whereas this number, these are clearly military figures included um, in non-military aid when they're estimating that. Now, let's go down here. This is an interesting map of um, the losses. Again, who knows what the accurate figures are? They're claiming. What's interesting about this is that they're actually losing less, the Russians, compared to April, according to this graph. They're losing in April roughly 40 armed personnel carriers a day and about 20 plus tanks. Certainly declined between May and July, far less in terms of actual equipment being lost by the Russians. Now I guess we discovered who put this up. This is similar to that map I showed you earlier. Here is an estimate of the balance of forces right now in the fight in Ukraine as of July 30th. So I found that sort of interesting. Some guy came up with this, and what he's arguing here is that the Ukrainians outnumber them in infantry, which I think other sources are saying too. That actually they've mobilized a ratio of 2 to 1 in terms of infantry along the front. Again, I don't pretend to know if that's the actual number, but that's sort of interesting that somebody would assert that. And of course, they don't have, they're talking about all these overall inventories of equipment, but they're arguing 10,000 pieces of equipment of armored vehicles, armored fighting vehicles, all sorts of different weapons carriers, etc., are being deployed against 2,000. Again, I do not know the accuracy of that. And tanks, the balance is actually not as much as it was in the beginning. Again, they're obviously referring to units in action. 1,500 tanks versus 800 to 1,000 tanks. Short-range artillery, 1,000 pieces versus 300. Okay, that's a little less than what we heard when we were looking at that 1,500 pieces versus 250 pieces in the Donbass. But again, we're talking about the entire front. Now, 650 medium-range artillery to 1,500 medium-range artillery. So that's 2,500 pieces versus 950 pieces. Interesting. Long-range artillery, 100 pieces on the Ukrainian side, including the SP guns, the Caesar, the Panzer 2000, versus 50 to 100. Now that I sort of find interesting. We can talk about that later. And here you have the MLRS balance. Now look, of course, the Russians have all those missile artillery as part of their order of battle, a 7-to-1 balance in favor. But then they're including here, all the different weapon systems that the Ukrainians are getting, including the HIMARS, MLRSs, etc., and Vilha-Ms, all these different weapon systems. And then that, of course, is a great imbalance because they're being bombarded all the time by cruise missiles and surface-to-surface missiles in the Russian inventory, particularly the Tochka, Iskanders, naval missiles. They're getting bombarded by air-to-surface missiles from the Russian Air Force.
And there, Jim, it should be mentioned that the Russian Toshka-Us, they had taken those out of service, and they just recently, I guess, took them out, back in 2018. They originally put them back into the field, and that literally gives them several thousand more, rounds.
Yeah.
So that means that they're not going to run out of.
All right, but what's interesting here is that the balance. What's interesting here is that this is as of yesterday. So this guy calculated this chart yesterday and published it yesterday. So what I found interesting was the artillery, estimates, which again, we don't know what precisely is going on, admittedly, but just to show you what an open source published, and we can go at it later. Now here is today. Now here's an interesting source. Some guy is sitting there plotting the number of Russian officers killed. And remember, they're hitting now the HIMARS, division headquarters, etc. And so this is his little. Again, where the hell he gets his information, I don't know. And again, it's we're in an information war, media war, winning hearts and minds, locally, regionally, nationally, internationally. So I always take that in mind when I look at it. I always make that little caveat. Now this is from today. So what's being reported is that there is a buildup of forces that could be aiming to attack Zaporizhzhia. Again, here is the firm's data. How much of this is global warming? How much of it is? Again, these areas are all rich. I'm going to have to dig up. I found this really incredible study on the Ukrainian agriculture. Next time we do that, I'm going to mainly focus in on that. It'll be quite illuminating. It'll show you how the areas that are fighting over right now are the areas that are the richest of agricultural production in the Ukraine, including the areas the Russians already have captured in the Donetsk Oblast. Now here's today fighting along the around Donetsk. Now they're implying that the Russians have begun offensive operations around Donetsk. Here is fighting around Bakhmut. And here's where you get that report of in the eastern suburbs of Bakhmut. Probably this force coming out of here. Again, the size of it, we don't know. Here's the fighting around Siversk. Again, Ukrainian maps here. What you can see, though, is what's interesting about this particular part of the front is I think you're seeing the effects of hitting those ammo dumps in the rear and screwing up their lines of communications with the HIMARS. Now, here is further south, I believe. Yeah, as the front turns. Oh no, this is this is Izium. So here's the fighting around Izium, and that's what I showed earlier in that other map. This was implying some sort of Russian advance in this area here, and here is again, look at that. Now that's the reportage of fires today. This is NASA firm's data. So what we're seeing is a lot of either fires due to global warming, fires due to whatever, collateral damage from artillery bombardments, or of course you're seeing in some cases the depth of fire into the rear of both sides. And look at down there around the area where remember that river is the bridges along the river have been compromised. I'm sure the Russians have pontoon bridge, engineering battalions setting up pontoon bridges to keep lateral communication. But look at the concentration of fire right outside Kherson. And then you have this fire going on here. Again, is it fires or is it HIMARS, whatever? In a sense, isolating and disrupting the movement of reinforcements, if in fact it is fire into the rear of the Russian forces. And now they're reporting 123 shelling locations as of today across the entire front. Again, we're seeing these patterns of artillery not that much different than what we're seeing every day, except there's a little more concentration of artillery barrages, certainly around Kharkiv, and then going all the way down to the Donbass, Bakhmut. Here's the Bakhmut area, and Siversk, and here's this concentration of power around Donetsk. And this is interesting. Now, this is where they're saying that the Russians are building up to attack Zaporizhzhia, etc. Now, here's a map from today showing artillery barrages, less intense than what we're looking at, but more focused in on the fighting around Kherson. Here's Kherson, and here's these operations going on, artillery barrages, and this is Russian artillery. So that's their penetrating farther into the rear of the Ukrainians over here. And here is now this is interesting. Came across this. Now, this is a estimate. Again, one can take with a grain of salt. These are reinforcements coming down into the Kherson area to reinforce the Russians. Although what this individual is interpreting this is that this is a further attack to not only thwart the Ukrainians around Mykolaiv, but to counterattack against them. And here you have the question of HIMARS strikes. This I thought was interesting. This guy was going through all the different reported uses of the weapons from late July down to early July, where they're hitting. And look at all the targets around Kherson. From the 18th to the 19th, hitting a radar site, a ammo depot, oil depots, or more ammo depots, etc. And here's the estimate of losses in the past 7 days, as of the 31st. So they're talking about, again, who can know the provenance of this. These are casualties being inflicted, KIA, I assume, on a daily basis. 270 on the 29th, 170 on the 30th, and 160 on the as of today. Now, when you look at the Russian sources, they will report casualty rates that were done by, obviously, troops in trench positions being bombarded. And that will sometimes, I know that Alex is going to chime in here in a minute, our boys, Dima and these other guys doing these Russian blogs, are reporting higher casualties than this. So, given the fact that the Ukrainians have less heavy equipment, it would make sense that their infantry losses are high or higher than the Russians if they are in static positions and being bombarded with concentrations of artillery to the extent that we're seeing. That is not an illogical assumption to make. Here is the loss of planes, missiles, etc.
It depends on the intensity of fire.
Yeah, true. But there's many factors. Now, here is again a thrust by the Russians. Here, I believe this is here's Donetsk is over down here. This is where that salient turns around and goes the other way. Now, these are Russian maps, so these are just keep that in mind. I'm making that clear. Here is the fighting around Bakhmut. That reservoir is taken. This is Kodyma. So this Russian map is saying they didn't take Kodyma as of today. Some of them implied that Kodyma had already fallen. Here's another. This is a counterattack by the Ukrainians. This is as the salient starts to turn in and head down to the Donetsk area. Here's the fighting around Donetsk. Now, this is interesting. Now, look at that. That's implying actually significant advances by the Russians around the area of Donetsk, and then attempting to pocket a force over here. So that's a pretty interesting advance, and those are that's coming through. If that's accurate, they're going through rather heavily fortified areas of the Ukrainian defenses over here, that they're basically pushing them out and getting beyond them, or probably hitting, because who knows how echeloned these Ukrainian defenses are. It's sort of it's like pretty much pretty well echeloned in the rear. Here's another map showing the area around Mykolaiv, and we have to top it off here, so these are different areas of fighting concentrated around Kherson. This is that area where they actually were. Here's that river where all the bridges are knocked out. That maybe one or two left standing structural bridges. And again, I'm not talking about pontoon bridges. And here are these little areas of concentration of fighting along the front at Mykolaiv. Now let's look at this. This is from today. These are one of these more detailed maps. I'm going to blow it up big time. So here's the fighting.
And that's the military land.
That's
map,
right. That's the military land map. That's again a pro-Ukrainian map. Now they're showing that again the front has not changed that much. There is, I believe, the ability of the Russians to bombard the suburbs of Kharkiv, but this is the front as they're portraying it as of today. I'm just going to move along, and here is Izium. So there's a lot of action, and this, by the way, here you look at the Russian maps, they're implying a much more robust operational situation here. They're implying a lot of these areas have already been captured, and they're also showing on the Ukrainian map thrusts from Izium, and then the fighting that goes on around here, which I'll show in a second, around Lyman. Lyman, of course, fell. Again, we've seen these spots many times. Here is the fighting. And it's interesting the way they do this. They jump right to Bakhmut. So here is the fighting around. Here's Soledar. Here's Bakhmut. Here's this area where they're probably implying they're getting into the suburbs of Bakhmut itself, the eastern part of it. Here's another attack going on by the Russians towards Zaitsev, and then further action over here around Kodyma. Then let's look at the area over here. Here is the area around Slavyansk. So again, not much change. I mean, we'll probably hear from Alex a little different assessment of this. And here's this area around Seversk. Now, here's this interesting penetration by the Russians pretty close to Seversk. This hasn't really changed that much when I look at these maps in the past couple of days. And here's the fighting going down to Bakhmut with probably battalion-sized attacks going along the front here. With heavy artillery support, I would probably add. And then it looks like they're finishing whatever envelopment of forces down here near the power plant. Now, here is, again, it's interesting. They want to show this in a bigger sense. Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, the fighting all the way over to Izium. So they're showing you a different portrayal of it, showing Izium separately. Interesting the way these guys are doing this right now. They're really putting a lot of effort into showing this fighting around Izium and Slavyansk and Seversk and Bakhmut. Here's the fighting further south. And this is now, here is the Ukrainians. Now, what we saw in those Russian maps was a much more robust advance, which is going on here, than what the Ukrainian maps are showing. But that is a significant advance to outflank this area, but they've been very caught on this fighting around this area for the past couple of years, frankly. And it makes sense if they're actually able to outflank it and force the Ukrainians to withdraw. We'll see what happens. The Ukrainians, I'm sure, have backup positions that we cannot see on this map. And here's the fighting around Donetsk. And now we're coming down along the front here towards Mykolaiv. And again, not much difference in the movement in there. Now here's where, again, here's the front around Zaporizhzhia. Now whether the Russians are massing forces here to take pressure off the fighting at Kherson, I don't know. That's what some are reporting. And here is the map of Mykolaiv. Again, different. You see all these cartographic, interpretations these guys come up with of what the fighting is. And this one is not particularly showing that much of a dramatic, and it's not showing these bridges being knocked out. So whatever the state of the ability of the Ukrainians to cross these bridges, I don't know. I'm sure the Russians have all sorts of pontoon bridges. And here's the fighting around Kherson. Now, whether the Ukrainians are concentrating forces to attack, as I mentioned earlier, the other reports were showing that the Russians were sending about 15 battalion tactical groups to reinforce this sector. So who knows what's going on? But that would imply that they do consider and have monitored a buildup of forces by the Ukrainians, and they don't want to give the Ukrainians any kind of tactical edge. At one point, they were talking about how they'd isolated an army, which is essentially a reinforced division. And I don't, as I mentioned earlier, I just cannot believe that Putin would allow a division-sized force to be destroyed by the Ukrainians. Anyway, so that finishes that. So I'm going to turn it over. Alex, you got some stuff you want to share with us?
Yeah.
Go on.
So let me bring up. Oh, Jim, it's screen sharing is disabled, so you got to like click on
Okay.
me or make me co-host. Or
Go
something.
on. There you go.
Okay. All right, so we're going to go with the Defense Politics Asia map. I'm going to kind of, a few minutes go through all the sectors, mainly from what the military summary channel has been saying, but some other. And then there's an interesting, I'll play like about 2-3 minutes from Colonel McGregor going on, the Judge Napolitano show, which I think he does about every week, to update his point of view, which will get some interesting. I'm sure we'll have a good debate about what he says. Yes, let me bring this up. All right. So again, interesting thing, again, not for now, but again, Dima from the military summary, he's saying that the Russians are massing some kind of force over here and that they intend to do essentially a long hook behind Kharkov to force them out. So again, obviously if that happens, that'll be very interesting. You can see here again, Defense Policy Asia guy, again, there's quite a bit of dispute as to that the Russians may have managed to have some success advancing. Remember, this is that Sherwood Forest, as the Russians call it. And obviously, again, this terrain is the forests are good terrain for the Ukrainian defense, and again, both sides are disputing the kind of this advance here. But if they have advanced, then again, they're obviously quite a bit closer to Slavyansk than they've been last week. Again, so again, this is the front line according to Defense Politics Asia. Oh yeah, interesting thing around Siversk that Dima mentioned is that again, so if you saw back to Jim's, the military land map, that indicates that there's a special forces battalion known as the Kraken Battalion somewhere here around in west of Siversk. And it's basically Depot Battalion is back here in Kharkov, I guess, for, again. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, they struck their depot because that battalion is scheduled to be rotated out of the line. And according to the Russians, they killed, 350 back here in Kharkov. So that's an interesting thing. Dima's been noting that they kind of striking, the rear areas of units that are supposed to be pulled out of the line in order to, disrupt that and maybe make the Ukrainians forced to keep them in. They get, worn down. It's easier to break through there. Okay. So again, kind of see here again. So again, remember Jim was mentioning Kodyma. Again, here, this is Defense Policy Asia. There are some, again, kind of, these are reports. Often they're based on, the Ukrainians saying, okay, we were fighting here. Of course, they almost always say, oh, we repelled the Russians. But the fact that fighting's reported there means, again, it's likely that they've reached there at least. Okay, so and I don't know if Jim's mentioned this in the past, but to take the Ugledarska power plant here, apparently, and I think this is confirmed by the Ukrainians too, that it was the Wagner group that did that was operating, and that was kind of the crucial force taking it. So again, it's interesting that they're using them. Again, like Jim said, they may have gone to Kodyma. They are definitely, making some advances in this area, and again, with the idea of kind of, getting closer to this major road here, cutting another supply route for Bakhmut, maybe rolling things up if they really get going. Also, there's an interesting report here, further, some interesting reports here at Avdiivka, sorry, pronouncing that some Ukrainian troops basically retreating without orders from it. Again, of course, coming from Russian sources, but I think there may be a video or two indicating. Also, an interesting report that, again, Dima had is that somewhere around here, the Russians managed to, kind of advance about like a kilometer and essentially seize part of the Ukrainian trench line. And he says if this is true, then what they probably will do is kind of roll right and left along to basically roll up the whole trench line, and then they will try and advance essentially. Yes, I think it's somewhere in this area north of the Donetsk airport. All right, so as we roll, also the Russians are making advances into the suburbs of Pisky here. But the interesting thing again is this kind of reported advance here in this area. Again, according to Dima, this again for a few days ago, I think it was basically at the beginning of this week. So according to Dima, and again based on Russian reports, the way the Russians were able to make an advance here is that, okay, there are two mechanized brigades, the 54th and the 56th. You'll see them again on the military land, and I think if he started doing them again, Jomini guy, because I think he's been he got COVID, he's been sick and out for a few weeks, but I think he may be coming back. But anyway, so essentially, the Russians, again, according to their sources, they hit successfully both the command posts of those two brigades, and then they attacked along the seam between them. And here, and again, according to Dima, again, according to the Russian source it looks at, the Russians have made considerable progress and are basically approaching this town of Nevelsky. And if they, again, so you can see it's not that big, but if they can anchor themselves here, they basically can, have what they call fire control. Again, they can set up artillery, and they can basically cut this entire, road that's supplying Pisky here. And that will make it, Pisky won't last long. And so that if that's true, again, they can advance, through these towns, and that will, again, according to Dima, but again, I think it makes sense that then Avdiivka would definitely be at risk of falling. Obviously, this whole line could, again, you can see that there are further, trench lines in the back, but there are, not as thick. And of course, again, the interesting fact the Russians are allegedly able to advance here is that, again, this has been the heaviest defensive lines through, and they have, not been able to advance essentially for 8 years. So if they're somehow now able to, that's, obviously should be concerning to the Ukrainians. Let me see if there was anything. Again, like Jim said, there's little bits of fighting along here. I don't know if Jim mentioned it, but again, I forget what the name of it. The bridge here. The Antonovsky Bridge. So in order to get around it, the Russians apparently have put, I think it's at least 3 pontoon bridges along here, again, within the last few days to kind of replace it. Also, there's an argument that the railroad bridge over here, that's much harder to take out because it's basically built on top of a dam. And again, the Ukrainians, for one, they don't want to destroy the plant here, the dam here, because again, it's going to flood the whole area, down. And and I think again, actually, it's might be a war crime to deliberately attack a dam. I remember when Nixon, I think, asked Kissinger if we could do it. I think Kissinger was saying, well, that's against the laws of war or something along those. Yeah, so again, there's supposed to be, I think it's 3 pontoon bridges, keeping the connection to the north bank of the Dnieper here. So let me jump to, again, so it's probably about 3 or 4 minutes total. Let's play 2 short clips again from Douglas McGregor's comments a few days ago. So start here, and then I'll jump forward to where he talks about his information about what the state of the Russian army. But first, we're going to hear about what he thinks is going to happen in August. So let's play this. Let me full screen it. Oh, and share.
Thanks for joining us and welcome here.
Sure.
What's the current state of affairs in Ukraine? The front page of the New York Times reports that Kyiv is back. Its nightlife is back. Its restaurants are open. And the people seem to be operating without fear for the first time since February, early February.
I think the Russians are completing their task in the south of fully occupying and controlling the Donbass. And I think that this is the last opportunity that Kiev has to negotiate an end to the conflict. I don't think that Moscow expects anything to happen. We've made it pretty clear, along with our friends in London, that we're not going to support any negotiated settlement. So I think they're pausing until August, when they'll launch a major offensive that will probably take them to the Dnieper River down in the south, near Zaporozhye and south of Zaporozhye, probably over to Odessa and eventually Transnistria. And I think we should expect them to take Kharkov up in the north. And that's about it. Those are the areas that are traditionally Russian speaking, the areas that were always part of Russia. And those are the areas that supply Ukraine with about 90% of its gross domestic product.
So
Russians are not interested in seizing Kiev, never have been.
Let's jump forward.
Will Ukraine peacefully accept the Russian dominance of those areas, or will they continue to beg? And if they beg, they'll probably receive arms from NATO and from the U.S. to continue this war, even in those areas.
Well, there are a couple of other factors in this multivariate equation, as you know. The EU economies, particularly Germany, are in real trouble.
Okay, well, it goes on about this.
Right now, Russia is exporting about to build those institutions, but they are now actively beginning to do that. The handwriting's on the wall. We've overplayed our hand, but our position is not that strong. People are talking about, well, are we in a recession? Of course we're in a recession. The economy is contracting.
Okay,
The question over the next 6 to 12 months, Judge, is are we in a depression? That's the question that people are going to start asking.
Well, that's the question that Joe Biden doesn't want to have asked, because he doesn't want to confront the reality of answering it. Not too long ago,
this is sheer
Colonel,
propaganda.
you told us that
Let him talk,
the
Brandon.
main Russian
Yep.
fighting
None of this.
force, their
Oh,
best
this should be
troops,
turned off.
were back in Russia relaxing
That's
or
the important part.
retraining or whatever they do. They're not in
You said
Ukraine
4 minutes.
fighting.
How
Sort
long
of
are we
the
into
second
this?
team is there. Is that still the case?
Yes. Most of the Russian troops are not active in combat right now. They're resting, refitting, reorganizing, retraining in some cases. And I think, again, that's in preparation for a massive offensive in August that will be designed, in the absence of any willingness on our part to negotiate, to finish the job in the south, take Odessa, move to the border with Transnistria. That turns rump Ukraine
Okay.
into a landlocked
Stop
country.
there. Yeah.
What happened?
So again, that suggests that Colonel McGregor, and I don't know, maybe he has some actual info, since again he was obviously, I'm sure still has friends, the DOD and the Pentagon. That there's the Russians may reinforce their forces considerably. Again, what he's saying, what he's implying is that again they may be taking troops that have fought in Ukraine, spreading them into other units, and kind of leavening them up with veterans.
Alex, are we going to be interactive here or no? I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to make what I think the point is he was.
This idea that there's a sort of a large enough amount of Russian forces that you could move around this astronomically, absurdly large front that is in essence unsustainable to have any advances in, that you can actually hold because you don't have any human beings that can hold the new position, reinforce your old position, and rotate to your rear so that you can achieve some sustainment. Like, there just isn't the volume here. So I mean, this sort of let's say magical realism of being able to take all this space that in let's say 2 to 3 months that the Russians have been on the, let's say, the offensive foot in the East, and how much have they taken of the East while they've thrown, basically their artillery kitchen sink at the Ukrainians. And this idea that they're going to go all the way to the Dnieper River, I just don't, with what? I mean, with who, literally? Like who will literally, I mean, this is my argument from the beginning. Ukrainians could literally go to the Dnieper River, allow the Russians to walk around, and then just send mobile kill units after them. And that would be that, basically. I mean, because there's just not enough force density that the Russians, basically both sides don't have enough force density that's competent. And so I don't see how this analysis is, and like, unless the Ukrainians literally not just give up, but like say that they're Russians now, I don't see how Russia can advance and hold large swaths of Eastern Ukraine. It just doesn't add up.
Well, again, Colonel McGregor obviously has a different assessment.
Well, I get that, but
he's had access to classified, a lot better
no access
classified
to
information
classified
than
information.
any of us has had, and more, read the straight dope essentially. So
he doesn't have access to
getting all this,
classified
I mean,
information.
he's,
Alex.
obviously in a professional sense, he wants to be proven right. So I don't see what,
No, but
what
Alex,
his point to basically lying about this.
Alex, he doesn't have access to classified information that he would be imparting. No one would do that because you would lose your TS clearance and your TSSCI if you did that. So there's no way he is imparting some magical classified information in some, interview show. That's just not how it's not the Series 24. Like, this isn't how things happen in the real world.
But what he's going to be based, again, on his previous knowledge, which may be a lot more than us.
Yeah,
Well,
can
should be a lot
how's it a lot more than us? I mean, I don't think there's I don't think
I
he's
just
throwing
don't see
crazy ideas
why he's lying.
Okay.
I don't assume people are lying. I just think he has a point of view that's yeah, exactly, and he's reinforcing that. And I think his point of view. Look, I'm not going to besmirch him, but his point of view is such that he believes in a approach to American policy that is much more regional spheres of influence. And so anything that sort of any shift in our policy for that, I believe is probably, is his point of view. And, and the Ukraine for people like that. So I'm not saying they're bad people or anything like that, but for people like that, Ukraine is not viewed in the strategic interest.
Sure.
Because it's viewed in the Russian strategic interest. But for other people, who just look at this as sort of just math. I mean, that's how I'm looking at this, is literally just math, and the math doesn't add up because you need force dent. I mean, I assume everyone agrees. Go ahead, please.
Okay, let's look at exactly what has been stated and what apparently is happening. Okay, we have in the Kherson Oblast, we have currently, up 2 days ago, there was apparently the 49th Combined Arms Army with approximately 10, maybe 15,000. It has been reinforced or is in the process of being reinforced. There is footage of one train being completely derailed with about 40 cars on it, 40 items, mostly tanks and other items. There's footage of that. But nevertheless, the Russians are, as Jim's and Alex's diagrams have pointed out, that there is apparently the 76th Airborne Division and I think the 22nd Motorized Rifle Division reinforcing the 49th. And so we're now looking at something in the order of like 25,000 moving into the Kherson Oblast. Now, according to this McGregor guy, they're going to take Odessa in August, okay, with this massive reinforcement, despite the fact that the Antonovsky Bridge has been demolished and they're relying on on what? Pontoon bridges. Actually, they're relying on ferries because it is a very wide river, the Dnieper, around that
Yeah,
point.
exactly.
And you've
That's the
got
only way you're going to do is ferries. And the problem with
Well,
ferries
well, I
is
mean,
that
let
if
me
you-
look at this.
yeah.
And the oblast is segmented by this other river, which has got a bunch of bridges that have been blown. But again, as Jim's pointed out, they've got pontoon bridges. That yes, definitely those pontoon bridges can augment what's been lost. So this is, in my opinion, as a military historian, just like everybody else here, very odd. Okay, you are reinforcing a failure. You've got a river behind you.
Exactly.
It is the Dnieper River. You cannot retreat across this river if those bridges are blown. You can't do it. So what has happened? Well, apparently, if this is correct, they have reinforced the 49th Combined Arms Army, and this is with the intention of doing what? Apparently, they're going to take Mykolaiv. How are they going to do that? They do not have precision munitions. They have a lot of artillery, maybe, but so as in this particular sector, so does the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians have got HIMARS. Now, I have been listening to arguments being made that the book M3, the air defense weapons system, can shoot down Toshkas, which is, the equivalent of the Iskandar, old version of the Iskandar that the Ukrainians have got. This thing, the book can shoot that down, no problem. But it is having a lot of problems trying to nail the HIMARS and may have a 1% hit kill. Now, apparently, they have taken back to Moscow a couple of these HIMARS rounds, the GMLRSs, and they're doing 3D analysis, and that will be incorporated into their radar for the book M3. All right. So maybe on the Russian side, somebody in air defense has said, we can stop the HIMARS. Well, that's a very problematic thing. And if they're basing their ability to cancel out the American precision munitions and again get dominance on the battlefield with their artillery, and they are reinforcing on that assumption, I think that's a bad assumption. That's what I think. And so here you have an army that is in dire straits if it does not succeed. Now, conversely,
And quick point, Frank, that you were making. If that was the case, one of the things you would never pick to do is a direct defense of a river, because that is so incredibly.
They are beyond the river. They have a river behind them. Now that's
but ultimately that means you're defending the river. I mean, that's what it means basically, right? Because you're defending.
No, you know, they're beyond the river. They are they're west of the Dnieper River. They are west of it. That means they are in the oblast and they have a large river behind them. Now, yes, if they were to do a sensible thing and give up the Kherson project and the Odessa project and retreat beyond the Dnieper River, that would be very easily defended. But apparently, Putin and his minions have made a decision to commit this Stalingrad kind of situation, such that they've got this army that has to perform in some way. And it sounds like they are really genuinely believing that they can go on the offense with their techniques and defeat the Ukrainians, who apparently are reinforcing with the intention of doing a counter-offensive on a large scale. So this to me is weird. All right. Now, conversely, there are problems on the Ukrainian side. And the problems, in my opinion, are American in origin. They are our general staff in origin. And that is, we manage wars. That is a McNamara thing, and it hasn't stopped. We manage wars. We think in terms of logistics, okay? And the problems associated with it. And I've heard that apparently the Howitzer 2000 it's a very, very, very delicate thing. And it has a red light if the I don't know if the windscreen wipers don't work, and so it completely goes down, and there's nobody who can fix it. All right, so that's what I've heard, and I sort of believe it. And also, of course, the Germans have got this brake system. They don't want to actually commit too much, and there is a counter argument in Germany that they don't want to see German equipment doing a la World War II. All right.
Absolutely.
So there's that issue. So that's a problem. But that's not the case with all the M77s, and it's not the case with the Caesars, and it's not the case with the Crabs from Poland. There's a lot of very sophisticated stuff, and we are giving Excaliburs to them. So I do not see this ability of the Russians to actually succeed in anything other than a disaster in the long terms, provided they do not adopt our methodology of war, which is management.
Frank, I
This
think
is a-
Ed wants to jump in.
Yeah, I know he wants to jump in. I understand that, but let me just finish. I'm saying that if we continue to influence the Ukrainian general staff such that they don't do battle, which means they've got to accept casualties. And if they're trying to get away with this by reducing casualties and relying on our sophisticated stuff, the Russians will reinforce and make it almost impossible for them to go on the offense. And they will just flood the place with their own troops. As stupid as that seems, if the Ukrainians do not accept the inevitable loss of large portions of elite troops in the taking of Kherson, and the possibility of obliterating Kherson in the process, this is going to be a protracted thing. That's all I've got to say at the moment.
Okay.
Okay, Ted.
Okay, I thank you, Frank. I appreciate that analysis, because I think it seems there was a clear overreach in McGregor's argument. But I was struck by the outrageous argument. We've heard it twice this evening, and certainly McGregor made the point that they're going to take Kharkov, and so they're somehow Kharkiv, the whole Kharkiv front is going to be a part of their glorious victory plan in this operation. And where are the troops for that going to come from? I don't see that at all. And they have an offensive north of Kharkiv, and all of their supply lines are within range of sophisticated material. If the Ukrainians shoot across the border, suddenly all their supplies are blown up. It's a very risky strategy if that's what they're thinking of doing. But where are they going to get the forces for that? So that the plan always has like 3 or 4 extra pieces, and this is quite typical. I mean, I think McGregor said it in many ways there. And the idea you're going to go, rush off Transnistria, we're going to Transnistrian 15,000 people are somehow going to make this a decisive victory. Maybe the Bessarabians have something to say about that. Moldovans may have something to say about that. And maybe the Romanians won't be too happy with that. There may be some other people who may not be too happy with that idea. If you're going to just sweep across and take that, you're going to land in Kharkov, how are you going to storm ashore at Odessa? And how are you going to support that base from Crimea? So there are just odd parts to this whole idea. I am not terribly optimistic about the Ukrainian prospects in the long run. I'm not saying the Ukrainians are going to win this war in the short term or the long term. The war is going to have to end at some point. But I happen to agree with Frank that if they don't fight for it in the critical areas where they are absolutely decisively challenged, then the thing will collapse. So I was surprised when they decided to evacuate or ask people to save their lives and move out of the occupied areas. That was a bit of a surprise. It seems like conceding that, but it might be a long-term strategically advantageous position if you're not planning to find a guerrilla war behind those lines, and you want to force the Russians to have to, harvest the grain themselves. Because who's gonna make that area economically productive if the people aren't there? Either they've been killed by the Russians or they've evacuated. So that's my main point. Every time the Russians get bogged down, they're going to take Kharkiv back, and that really surprises me every time that comes up. Thank you.
Thank Jim.
Well, I want to get back to McGregor. You know, this is my opinion, my belief. Uh, you know, Doug is was a brilliant young officer. His book Breaking the Phalanx, so I remember when that came out, that was in the 90s, and that was considered a provocative book. Sort of a JFC Fuller, B.H. Liddell Hart kind of book in terms of the Army. He urged radical reforms, etc. But the way I compare him to J.C. Fuller is that we know the politics of J.C. Fuller. He was a sympathizer with Mussolini. And again, you know, like, do I read Manstein, Lost Victories, and not recognize that he's a brilliant officer? Absolutely. Do I not recognize that he's using his brilliance to defend Nazi Germany? Absolutely. Now, in the case of McGregor, you know, McGregor's come out with some real humdingers over the years. He's asserted that Muslim immigrants came to Europe with the goal of eventually turning Europe into an Islamic state. He's argued that the German concept of basically Vergangenheitsbewältigung, which is basically coping with the German Nazi past, is a sick mentality. He's called for martial law along the U.S.-Mexico border. I'm surprised that he hasn't been called up to the January 6th Commission, because he was the senior advisor to acting Defense Secretary Christopher Miller. He's always been in favor of Putin's policy. In 2014, he got on the RT and talked about how the annexation of Donbass was the right thing to do, and that the Ukrainians were not Ukrainians; they were Russians. Again, you know.
Always leave the Russian. He says that. Yeah.
Yeah. He made those comments, and then he's made some interesting comments since the invasion. He's called Zelensky a puppet. Okay, I've heard that on the left too. The one humdinger was that the Russian forces were too gentle in the early days of the invasion. That was sort of an interesting comment to make. And that Vladimir Putin is being demonized by the United States and NATO. Now, again, we can argue, I'm sure I could do content analysis of media across the board and make that argument. On the other hand, does Putin deserve to be pilloried? I do believe that. And he's been characterized as an appeaser, as an apologist of Putin. So, you know, the question of whether he's right or not, well, he could be right. He could be right. Sure. On the other hand, you know, it's like, you know, we've got everybody here making predictions that, you know, Russia's going to fall in 2 weeks. So, you know, I have to say that I sort of put that in the category of, you know, whether they're going to take Odessa or not, I don't know. I just see this as, unfortunately, again, you know, we've all agreed here on the issue of the midterms, on the issue of national politics, which I will want to end the show with in a few minutes to talk about that. That'll sort of be interesting to get everybody's opinions on that. But, you know, it's you know, and again, you know, whether we take the accuracy of those reports that they're shifting the equivalent of a division and a half down there to meet this thrust in the Kherson area. Well, it makes sense because, you know, Putin does not want to have a political embarrassment of a combined arms army being annihilated by the Ukrainians. I mean, I go back to the Chinese farm analogy in the October War, you know, or the 2nd and 12th Cav during the Tet Offensive. It is not going to happen. The political consequences, or Kherson. Imagine if they hadn't concentrated on relieving the 26th Marine Regiment reinforced in Kherson. I mean, again, a political defeat like that is of mammoth proportions. You know, as LBJ said, I don't want any Dien Bien Phu. So, you know, this is not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I just find it absurd to even think that the Ukrainians are going to be able to pull off an envelopment of a force of that size. And it's also interesting what Alex was saying, that Dima's saying. It shows that at a lower level of command, that is the battalion commanders, the brigade commanders, the company commanders, the Russians seem to be getting their tactics down in terms of fighting the Ukrainians, using lots of artillery, skillful use of infantry, attacking at the seams of brigade boundaries. Oh, well, when's the last time? What does that remind you of? You know, and so anyway, but let Frank jump in there.
Well, you're probably correct that they are perfecting some of those skills, provided they have the artillery support and they can, I suspect, using their own mortars in particular, augment the whatever 152s and 122s they've got in support of local attacks, as you mentioned, the incremental stuff. But what's going on in the Kherson area is not that, it's not that straightforward, in that they need to be supplied. If they're going to do these logistics, these mass artillery strikes, they've got to have those bridges secure. And if without that, then everything is in jeopardy. The whole element, whatever they put down there, if it's two combined arms armies, yes, what they've done and the arguments about the Kharkiv encirclement is always put the Ukrainians on the back foot. They are forced to do defensive postures on a wider front than they can handle. And the reason is, it doesn't really, what they've accomplished, the Russians, is they do dominate the mentality of the battlefields tactically with these prods, even if it's only just less than 100 guys and a few tanks. The Ukrainians prefer to be on the defense, and they're not suffering terrible casualties. And you're right, they are going down the seams, and the net result is that Ukrainians trade some territory. They've got to stop that. That somebody needs to tell them, and just look, you've got to go on the offense, and it means you're going to lose a lot of guys, and your very best guys at that. You've got to stop them in the Kherson Oblast. You've just got to. And if they don't do that, and they don't do that in a hurry, then they're going to be depending on the West's remaining, in the fight, which you can't guarantee. And they've got to make a decision soon. And I'm talking them within the next couple of weeks, because that's it. Yeah.
All right. Well, those are good points. Although, and I just can't see them sacrificing unnecessarily precious resources. Again, we don't know what they're building up in the rear. You're right. But the issue of political will and commitment is key to understanding this. That's for sure. And I wanted to play some pieces going out. I just want to sort of set the stage for discussions. This is sort of interesting because, remember, Orban is the ally of Putin in Europe. And he made this comment, and I would consider, in my opinion, someone like Doug is unfortunately turned into a white nationalist. But anyway, and that's always something interesting, strange bedfellows politically on these issues. But this is a piece about Orban's aide making that speech last week that was essentially, a speech out of the Arrow movement in Hungary in the 30s and 40s.
Comparing his recent comments on race to the Nazi era, Mr. Orban had described Western Europe as a mixed-race world, saying Hungarians should only mix with other Europeans. Live to Nick Thorpe now, who joins us from Budapest. Nick, good to see you. Viktor Orban often talks about race, but has he ever taken it this far?
Not quite, no. He does seem to have gone further this time. He's often spoken in the past about Hungary as a culturally homogenous country, but not so much as an ethnically homogenous country. And what's, I think, sort of made this particular advisor to him, she's actually the Commissioner for Social Inclusion. She's of Jewish background herself. What made her explode and hand in her resignation is that really he went much further. He seemed to be suggesting that Hungary is somehow ethnically pure, or that at least ethnically, racially wise, that Hungarians should not mix with people from outside Europe. And clearly that's gone further than he has before. And it was just too much for this particular minister.
So it's a blow to him that she's resigned, Nick. But what's Viktor Orban said since those comments? Does he in any way acknowledge that they're racist?
No, he doesn't. He replied personally to her. And after all, this is a close friend of his, one of his inner circle. And this is a country where people on the whole do not criticize Mr. Orban from his own camp. He's used to criticism from the liberal, from the left side, from Brussels, from the European Union and beyond. But he's not used to this kind of criticism from inside. Mr. Orban defended himself very fiercely. He said, look, you've worked with me for 20 years. You know very well that I'm not an anti-Semite, that I'm not a racist. What's interestingly, though, is that she has since replied to his letter. And this is sort of adding fuel to the flames in a way and adding to this debate in Hungary, because she has now become something of a media personality. She's getting a lot of airtime on media critical of the government. And she has said, look, this is the kind of speech which people didn't take into account in the 1930s when Hitler rose to power. This is the kind of speech which whips up feelings, whips up racism, even if the Prime Minister himself is not a racist in her view, and that can lead to genocide.
Nick, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
All right, and that's one of the contradictions in this complicated situation we're looking at all the time, because I'm sure that people on the left who are critical of American foreign policy, and this goes with Noam Chomsky and all the rest of them, would never defend something like what Orban said. So it just shows you the kind of interesting, complicated international environment we're operating in. And this is the piece that you guys were talking about earlier. This is on the question of what happened in this incident with these POWs. Again, who knows? I do not know. This is the BBC reporting.
100 Russian soldiers in the southern region of Kherson, the focus of its counter-offensive. It also said that 2 ammunition dumps and 7 tanks had been destroyed in the region on Friday. It comes as the United Nations and the Red Cross have been asked to investigate the deaths of more than 50 Ukrainian prisoners of war. They were killed where they were being held at the detention center in the Russian-occupied part of the Donetsk region. These are pictures of the rocket attack, which is thought to have led to prisoners' deaths. Ukraine and Russia have accused each other of carrying out the attack. Ukraine says Moscow is trying to cover up evidence of torture and war crimes at the site. President Zelensky gave this reaction to the attack in his nightly address to the Ukrainian people.
I've received reports about the attack in the Donetsk region. It was a deliberate Russian war crime, a deliberate mass murder of Ukrainian prisoners of war, more than 50 dead. When the defenders of the Azovstal left the plant, the UN and the International Committee of the Red Cross acted as guarantors of the life and health of our soldiers.
Let's speak now to our correspondent Paul Adams in Kyiv. And I just called it a rocket attack, actually, in that introduction, but we don't actually even know that, do we, Paul? Talk us through what's known about this.
No, you make a good point. Nothing about this is clear at all. It was the Russians who said that this was a rocket attack, a Ukrainian rocket attack, using sophisticated American-supplied rockets, but hitting a building full of Ukrainian prisoners of war. Frankly, it's an explanation that beggars belief, and I don't think really anyone among Western observers is really setting much store by this. The British ambassador here in Kiev issued a tweet this morning in which she made it fairly clear, without directly pointing the finger at the Russians, that she thought this was part of a pattern of human rights abuses and possible war crimes in occupied eastern Ukraine. So I think there's a general assumption among Western observers that the Ukrainian explanation, which is that this was something engineered by Russia or Russian-backed separatists, is more likely. But we still don't know, because no one has yet been granted access to the site. No one has been able to investigate it. No one independent has been able to investigate it. Just in the last few minutes, we heard that the Ukrainians have already initiated the process of trying to get the bodies back. The Russians this morning have published a list of those people who it says were killed in this attack, most of whom do seem to be, we think, from that Azov battalion, the battalion that was responsible for holding out in the steelworks in Mariupol until May.
How likely is it that Russia would grant any kind of access, do you think?
I think very reluctantly and possibly not at all. The Red Cross may get access because the Red Cross will want to check that those people who survived, who we've seen pictures of in hospitals in nearby Donetsk, are being properly looked after. They will have been concerned, for example, at the spectacle of a video released overnight in which some of those survivors who were clearly traumatized were being quizzed by Russians about what had happened, being asked to confirm that this was involved American-made rockets and so forth. Just conducting an interview like that represents a breach of the Geneva Convention. So there's plenty for the Red Cross to go and find out about. Whether they will have the opportunity to get to the scene, to establish the facts of what happened, well, frankly, I'm a little doubtful.
Yeah, and well, meanwhile, Ukraine's military says that it's killed more than 100 Russian soldiers in the southern region of Kherson, hasn't it?
Yeah, so this is very much a focus of Ukrainian attention at the moment, trying to squeeze that pocket around the city of Kherson, the first city that was taken by the Russians back at the beginning of this war. They've been hitting bridges connecting that pocket to other parts of Russian-controlled territory. They just announced today that they hit a railway bridge, which is also another key link, all designed to try and isolate those Russian troops. And they say, as you mentioned, that they're hitting them hard. I should say that every day brings these sorts of claim and counterclaim. There was a statement from the Russians a short time ago saying that a couple of days ago they killed 130 elite Ukrainian troops on board a train over in the Donbass. So, you know, we do hear these competing claims from the two warring parties, and for the most part, we're not in a great position to verify any of it.
Okay, well, thank you very much for talking us through all of that. That's Paul Adams for us there in Kyiv.
Right, and we're not in a great position to verify any of it. How true. Now, let me just finish with this piece in the New York Times today. Where is it? Very, very interesting. Let's see. But any comments on that? I mean, Alex, did you dig up something that contradicts that?
Well, just the Russian explanation as to why. Just
do you have that?
For why they claimed the Ukrainian. Again, they claim it was hit with HIMARS. You know, and obviously, I'm sure.
Well, that can be proven.
Yeah.
That can be proven with forensic analysis. It's not like it's impossible not to prove.
Yeah. Well, again, their allegation is as to why the Ukrainians would have done this is basic. Again, this is, you know, part of the A's of guys who were in, and that they were basically starting to talk about atrocities that they had committed, and so this was a message from the Ukrainians to, you know, kill the people who were talking, but, you know, to convince the rest, you know, not to stop talking. So again, that's, you know, yeah. You know, it's just it's well, you can argue about both situations, though. Again, I would just think that, you know, it's a pretty weird to use, you know, if you wanted to get rid of Russians want to get rid of people, you know, there are easier ways than shooting a missile at them. And wouldn't you get, well, then other things like, okay, well, they're going to risk their camp guards and so on. Yeah.
Well, one never knows. One never knows.
I just should mention one allegation from the Russians now, and again, there's a video of this. Is that the Ukrainians have been, you know, to dropping with cluster munitions, these small mines that are clearly designed to PFM1s that are clearly, if this is true, they're designed to basically kill civilians. Again, they're dropping in a civilian area, and this is actually against a 1996 modification to the Geneva Conventions that bans, because they're so small, and really they're not. I mean, in theory, they could be used, I guess, I think, on like a specifically military area. But also, it's, I think, the convention. There's a conventional arms convention of the UN that was everybody signed in 1980 that said, you have to identify the areas where you put the mines, and you're not supposed to dump them from submunitions basically behind in civilian areas. So again, the Russians have photos of these alleged mines, and yeah. So that's the kind of also there another counter from then
All
and
right.
there
Well,
these are being delivered again by cruise missiles according to the
all right.
Russians.
All right. Interesting. All right. Interesting. And of course, one knows about the Allies sinking the prison ships in World War II. But again, who knows what the truth is? And unfortunately, it's sort of like COVID. Nobody's going to prevent anybody. I don't.
I'll send the link with again the pictures of these mines.
All right.
There has to be a logic. There has to be a logic to it, though.
Well, there has to
Well,
be.
the logic would be that the Russians are going to have trouble demining the Donetsk area, and it's going to take troops and time.
But the Russians are going to have to. I mean, the issue of whether Russians decide to submit to some international investigation about this incident is going to be very interesting. All right. Anyway, so this is a piece that appeared in the New York Times today about asking a focus group what comes to mind when you hear about American democracy. Now, remember, we're going through this amazing. While this conflict's going on, we're in a state of domestic turmoil politically, at least about. Alignments. I understand. What's his name? Yang started a third party. I don't know how far that's going to go. But here are people responding to a statement, both Trump and Democratic voters, about democracy that's in jeopardy, an illusion, on life support. And now you have this argument. So they're trying to ask.
Hey, Jim. Mike wants to say something. He's all.
Well, not yet.
He can't. No, I know, but what I'm trying to say is he's unable to get off of mute. So I think you have him on permanent mute.
No. I think Alex would have done that. I've been away from the phone.
No, I haven't.
No, Al, you're not on.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm not.
You should be on permanent mute, but I didn't do that, Michael. You just have to hit *6 or something like that, man. I did not put you on mute. But you can try to unmute. I don't know what to do because I just tried to unmute you. But anyway, so here we have these divisions. Maybe you need to call back in and then come in fresh. So where does democracy go from here? And so they had a 2-hour discussion with these people. And they're asking them what they think about January 6th. Violence is not the American way. Why do you insist on saying violence is not the American way? The country was built on violence.
Revolution.
And
776.
They're referring to Biden, of course, Sleepy Joe. One guy was asked whether Biden would run again, said the president wouldn't because he would realize at 80 years old he's not capable. What we need now is a uniter. That's why I don't want him to run again. And who might that be? Does he exist at all? And then you have, this is the focus group. Amy, Kathy, Dee, Eric, Fareed, Erica, Ricky, Santiago, Tom, Ryan, Sean, Jacqueline, and Sherry. Interesting group, all throughout the country. And so here they're responding to, here's the great comment from Network. Are you mad as hell not going to take it anymore? And then all these people have their comments about it. There's so much violence, inflation's out of control, COVID-19, I'm tired of restrictions, Supreme Court.
Jim Luntz, he's that former Republican operative, right? Who kind of criticized Frank Luntz. I think he's a former Republican who worked for Bush, and then he
has a firm in DC, that in Virginia, that basically runs focus groups around the country, not just for news services, but also for institutes and
for political campaigns.
And not limited to just Republicans. He works across.
I think he was though, like a former Republican.
No, I mean they almost all are, because that's how they get their credibility, and then they build their company.
All right. So here they're saying all their different comments about the problems, crime, inflation, people losing their rights, guns have more rights than people, lack of leaders from the White House. Leadership at this point is non-existent, and that goes for Republicans and Democrats. I've heard that a million times. I would say that was the most, in 1968, 69, 70, that was what the silent majority, whenever you had discussions with people about the war in Vietnam and about the politics of the election in 68, they basically say they all stink. They all stink, And I'm mad at the level of polarization. And then why do you say you can't talk about things? And I've had people say without saying a word not to talk because they know I'm pro-life. I've been silent on social media because I know it's... So here you got this question of whether people are willing to express themselves in a civil manner. And is it different than 20 years ago? People in the older generation that I know, but they talk to each other. Interesting. It's people in their 20s and 30s and even sometimes in their 40s who don't talk to each other. Well, that's interesting insight. I wonder if that's accurate. Maybe Generation Z and the younger millennials can be more rigid. And then
Where did they say she was? Where is she from?
She's from. She's a campus minister, a Trump voter, right?
Well, yeah. Again.
All right.
Maybe
Anyway,
for the
let me just go through this. Erica, you brought up the Supreme Court. My instinct is you're not on the same side as Kathy. And well, yeah, I guess she isn't. Well, I don't think it's a good thing that our rights are taken away. So here you get into this question of polarization of the Supreme Court. Now, how many people have stopped talking to someone because your politics and his or her politics were different? And all these different people raise their hands. Interesting, most of them are Trump voters. My brother's an extreme liberal. Oh, he just stopped talking to me. He thinks I'm a nut job. It doesn't matter. Blood is not thicker than politics, I guess. And sure, you're mad at the polarization. Who do you blame on that? I blame the majority of white America. They are too damn silent. I don't agree. I'm a white, cisgender, straight Christian male. I've been trying myself to speak up more. Respectfully, I disagree. I'm Hispanic. I'm somebody that's brown. Usually some of the most racial stories I get attacked with are from the liberal left. I get called a coconut all the time. I'm brown on the outside and white on the inside. Now, I'm from South Mississippi. I built a 21-year career living and working every day in Midtown Manhattan. As soon as they find out I'm from Mississippi, I'm a racist right off the bat. I'm a Trump guy. Then this other person, well, look at the atrocities of America. If you look at the atrocities globally, it's come primarily from white, elitist, quote, unquote, Christian individuals. Jesus was the greatest social activist ever. I understand my Latina brother who says that he's experienced racism primarily from the left. I'm talking from, I vote, so you got that opinion. I agree with Sherry. I'm Jewish. Just recently swastikas in Skokie. Haven't we got that all behind us? Our country has had some of its dark periods. I'm not denying that. But this country's so amazing. And the guy talks about Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln. My family comes from Cuba and Mexico. We know what socialism is. I know what communism is. And America's far from that. That's true. Is America a racist country? So all these different people raise their hands. And they say, I guess they say yes. I have 4 kids. 4 white, relatively privileged kids growing up in Ohio and given the upbringing they come from and the color of their skin versus the kids that come from. So this guy makes his comment. After about 40 years, I finally decided to listen and truly believe people of color when they talk about their experiences after 40 years. I say I'm a recovering conservative. Jacqueline says this country was founded on racism. Whites have never considered blacks or people of color as equal human beings. It continues today. If America's so embedded in the slave thing, I mean, why are there so many race hoaxes and so many false claims? He brings up Tawana Broadley. And Jacqueline goes, you're kidding. And then the guy goes, I'm white. I don't know what it feels like to be black. I'll put that right out there. And then is that the best you could come up with, Tawana Broadley? Yeah, that's, I must admit. James Woods wants to make a movie about Tawana Broadley. I always found that amusing. No, I'm putting it out there, but there's
that ain't funny.
And then Jussie Smollett. Yeah, I remember he told that to me at a Lincoln Center film thing. I said, man, did the coke get to your brain, man? Anyway, and you have Lil Wayne and others talking about racism. They basically don't believe there's such a thing as that exists in America. That's interesting. He saw Lil Wayne. That's interesting. They spake from a small minority. And then every time, as a country, tried to turn the corner on the whole issue of oppression, we assassinated Lincoln. We assassinated Kennedy. We assassinated LK, Robert Kennedy. We character assassinated President Obama. And then look at the Chicago. I worry about the black boogeyman, etc., etc. Guns. Now they get into guns. Are you worried about the 19-year-old kid who will come in the grocery store and into church and kill people? They are 15s. Guns don't kill people. People, we heard that already. People will kill people. And then let's see. Is American broken? So everybody raised their. Oh, look, all 9 of them raise their hands. And this is yes, the conversation we just had, we get blamed. All the people who look at like me. Okay, Mike's coming here. But, you know, I'm married to a black woman. I think trying to sit here and call me a racist and everything we do is racist just escalates from there. And then this guy says about Obama. I know Obama came up a few times. I didn't vote for him. And the reason it has nothing to do with his skin color, I don't agree with his policies. Every single issue is very polarizing. Absolutely, America's broken, this woman says. There's a lack of cohesive leadership. I'm disappointed in Biden. And then, given the blah, 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 who would bring this country together? Now, this guy says Peter Buttigieg. I don't know about that. Andrew Cuomo.
That's the answer.
Yeah, Pete, good old Pete. And then this guy says, I give Patrick credit for not making a facial expression when you mentioned Andrew Cuomo. Sherry, tell me why. And then I think up to the point of the sexual sense. So, yeah, we know that Cuomo was trying to embark on a presidential run and got derailed, so to speak. And then this guy goes with Chris Murphy. I love it. Then Ron DeSantis, another great unifier. And then AOC. She's young, passionate, energetic, and that's a Trump supporter. And then I'll go for a dark horse, Evan McMullin, who served in the CIA. Then, Ron DeSantis, Tulsi Gabbard, and Marco Rubio. Governor Hawkill. Okay, so that's an interesting range. What's a word or phrase that comes to mind when you hear the words American democracy? In jeopardy and life support. I would just say in jeopardy. An experiment in peril. Takeover. The election was horrible. The shining city on a hill. Opportunities avail. Illusion. Battered and bruised, but it can be saved. And then she asks, well, can you explain what you mean by in jeopardy? And then all this nonsense about electoral fraud that hasn't been proven. All the efforts that are taken to overthrow what I believe was a fair and free election. And then we're going about, the question of how these guys are still coming after the vote. And she goes, I think if you get enough corrupt people in right offices, it's entirely possible to have this repeat itself. Kathy, why do you believe American democracy is in jeopardy? This is a Trump supporter. She goes, instead of talking and working together, I feel like every time there's a problem, we're resorting to violence. Well, we don't like this. We're going to take the Supreme Court Justice's house, when they went after Brett Kavanaugh.
That's violence, according. Wow.
Well, anyway, why do you insist on saying violence is not the American way? Because violence was not directed at you, hanging African Americans from trees, burying people alive.
That's right.
All this is the American way. Go ask the Native Americans. And then let's see Kathy responds. She says, that's just a flat attack. It feels unfair to say that. And then you go to Frank. And then Sherry, blah, blah, blah. I didn't mean to paint the whole left because it's not the whole. Oh, yes, it is. It's like a group in the left. Pointed out then Charlottesville is the only one you're going to be able to do. And could I interject a quick opinion? Oh, January 6th. But they forgot that they tried to assassinate a Supreme Court justice. So I guess I'm referring to Brett Kavanaugh. And then, they're going blah, 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 blah. And then, oh boy, look at this. Kathy goes into a big rant here. So the first is heard about something early about the color of my skin. Yes, I'm super white. I get it. But the reality is we don't know each other. We don't know each other's personal lives. And then she refers to the color of skin comment by King in the I Have a Dream speech. And I don't know what happened with the election. Biden's the president. I'm going to work hard, but something just fell off. I remember Trump was in our swing states, and all of a sudden he was stopped counting. So she thinks the election was phony. And then back and forth. What has changed that has caused this disintegration in our ability to talk to each other? I don't see empathy towards the next person anymore. True. I think this whole divide is not from anything outside of the fact that we've abandoned God in this nation. And then Sherry had reminded everybody that I said that Jesus Christ was the first social activist. And then they're going on, and then why were we so violent now? Why do we have Charlottesville? Why do we have January 6th? They're inappropriate outlets for people to express themselves. Yeah, that's true. I think all of us would probably agree on 70% of the things that happen in our daily lives. And then what does Frank do? He says, let's move on. So how many of you, now here we get to the punchline.
Wait,
how many of you want
back.
Trump to run? Only these two guys, Fareed
only two.
and Ricky. Okay, so why do you like Trump? Well, I held my nose, but we need somebody with real leadership, and we don't have anybody. I think what we really need now is a uniter.
Oh, boy.
That's why I don't want him to run again. So this guy disagreed with that. There are a couple of you want Trump to run. Why? He defunded Planned Parenthood the best he could. You guys got to relate how strong Planned Parenthood is. And then this other guy goes, unemployment at 50 years low across all. And let me emphasize the word all racial categories. No inflation, low gas prices, no worldwide conflicts other than Afghanistan, which he didn't start. Hold on, this is not a campaign commercial. Raise your hand. Wait, I lost it. It's getting funnier and funnier. All right. Raise your hand. Okay, here we got the Trump thing. Raise your hand if you like Biden. Oh, no, only one person.
The Jewish.
White Illinois. Yeah, she's the Jewish girl from Only one of you, well, Trump is a bad guy. He's racist, misogynistic. But I will say that Trump's nickname for Biden, Sleepy Joe, is right. Biden's done absolutely nothing. I don't see him as the leader of the party. That's the black Pennsylvania voter. I don't see him as the leader of the party going forward. He's out of touch with the rest of the country. There's only one Biden person who wants him to run. And then what does she say? I don't think he'll run because he will realize at 80 years old he's not capable. But I think Biden was a breath of fresh air after a little violence from Trump. And the Bible doesn't belong in politics. It's separation of church and state. The Bible is a book of fables. Right on, girl. Okay, I want to move from the presidency to the Supreme Court. Okay, they're going to go back and forth talking about this. We're living through a sort of dystopian nightmare. Pretty true. Where's the last time? Okay, the bidding, the mad as hell. I guess they're close to the punchline here. What's the last time we passed budgets without reconciliation? Compromise doesn't exist anymore. I'd like to see more balance in the Supreme Court. I'd like to see bipartisan support on major issues. And then, is there any issue which you think is possible? And then this guy goes, if we had more people like Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema, a centrist on both sides, and then said, let's see, they go here, is there anything that could make people on different sides find a common ground? A third party. And then what Sean says, it's unrealistic. Every time we try, it just pulls votes. If you have Trump running, then you have another Republican running third party. The Democrats are going to win. I'm going to ask each of you one word for Congress. Stuck, banana republic, confused, dysfunctional, money talks, too few fighters, ineffective. You realize and agree on one thing. What's the problem with Congress? They're not people. They're not we the people. Term limits. And then the last question. If you could do one thing to make the country more united, what would you do? Now, here you got the universal stipend. That's from Yang, Andrew Yang, if I recall. If people actually understood our Constitution, they would realize that each of these elected officials derive their power from the consent of us. No shit, Shakespeare. If you took money out of Congress and got rid of lobbyists and people started voting for more of what their constituents want, we might...
I think it's Sherlock, that's Shakespeare.
Well, actually, you can... Yeah, Sherlock, Shakespeare.
Right.
I think I've been watching Kiss Me Kate too often. I would love to install term limits for the Supreme Court. Age 70, you retire. If Biden keeps going, you're going to actually unite people. It's not the way you want to unite. That's interesting. Term limits. I'm fresh out of kumbayas, Patrick. I don't believe you can reconstruct what needs to be deconstructed. It needs to be torn down from the ground up, start over. Okay. So, what do you think of all those comments?
Constitutional amendments.
Wait.
Constitutional convention.
A constitutional convention, Ted?
Well, that's what they're, yeah.
Get away with Bill of Rights stuff. All that stuff.
Is Michael here? Did Michael finally get in here? Yeah, Michael, go on.
Finally, I could get on. Fourth try. 4 times I had to get on this show before I could do it.
Congratulations, Michael.
That's all right, Michael. Next time.
Looking forward to hearing from you.
Right.
I am.
Question. Well, I have to jump back to the Ukraine for a second. How many non-POWs were killed or wounded in that attack on the POWs, wherever it came from? Does anybody know?
Well, they said 50 dead, 74 wounded. It was the number I last heard. Didn't say non-POWs, though. It didn't say like how many camp guards died.
Right. I mean, that would say something. If there were no casualties other than the POWs, that would kind of put the box.
They could always take care of that. Yeah, clean it up.
But so that's something that's some information that we should try to get, because first of all, no, I don't think it's likely that it came from the Ukrainians. On the other hand, why didn't the Russians do what the Waffen-SS used to do and just shoot them, and then start a fire to cover their tracks? But in any case, I'd like more information on that. As far as what you were just reading before, I mean, I don't know. Some of those people were probably very intelligent people. I don't think too many of them came off that way. The United States, Americans have traditionally been totally unaware of what the United States is all about. I once showed people, I was arguing with somebody about the Constitution, and this is a relatively intelligent person, and they said, I said, well, where do you find it in the Constitution? He says, oh, I don't know. But it's so big, I can't go through the whole Constitution. And I pulled out a copy of it, which is, fit in my breast, in my jacket. And I showed it to him, and he goes, that's not the whole Constitution. I said, yes, it is. And he had never read it. He had never seen it. He had no
Get out.
concept.
Get out,
what the
really? Really?
States was. Yes, and this is a guy who had been to grad school.
Well,
so we have a problem here,
but
and a lot of it may.
Go
I mean, it may have to do with civics education. I don't know. I know that they're teaching civics again more than they used to in recent years. But I'm sorry. This, that's what I mean. This whole thing about, well, if you're born in the United States, you're automatically American, but if you're immigrant, you can apply for it. I mean, if you take the look at the citizenship test that immigrants have to take in order to become American citizens, I would say probably 3 out of 4 Americans who are born in this country couldn't pass that test.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
So, yeah, we've always had this problem. I mean, we've got problems with racism going back incredibly. I mean, we have problems, people are saying, well, why do they have to have this 1619 project? Why can't they just see history the way it was? And I'm going, well, that was the way it was.
Exactly.
So I don't know. I don't know what's going to help this country, but if it makes you guys feel any better, somebody just said, one scientist just came out and said, it's really too late to reverse climate change. We're just going to have to learn to live with it if possible.
Go to the beach.
So there you go. That means we have nothing to worry about in the long run because there is no long run.
Well, we started the show with the book that guy just wrote. So, yeah, you're right, of course. And here is an interesting little survey about American public knowledge of history, which I know will it's not going to be any surprise to a group like this. But this was done by the American Historical Association, and so there's and again, one has to you look at the kind of debates going on throughout the society. The debate in Texas over the textbooks, where they get pissed off if you don't mention and stress the Judeo-Christian values. Now here, of course, most Americans take their information of history. This is where, of course, Ken Burns comes in. 69% of them take their information of history from documentaries.
Yeah, the Hitler Channel. Yeah.
Yeah, the Hitler Channel. Right. The Nazis all the time, and then from fictional film.
Yeah.
So they'll watch Gone with the Wind.
Yeah.
And then TV news, and let's go on down the line here. College course, 8%. History lecture, 12%. And then
so much for me.
right.
Wait, to go up a minute, because I think that one for history video games. I want to see what percentage.
Yeah, that's
very good. Let's see, video games, very good.
11%, almost as much as lectures. Wow.
Right.
Historical fiction. At least it's under nonfiction.
Well, Wikipedia gets a pretty good score. I mean, some things in Wikipedia aren't bad. But again, look, film.
People getting their history from Hollywood.
Right, correct.
The majority gets a history from Hollywood. We're
correct. And TV news, interesting. History from TV news, fascinating. And none of this really interest in learning about the histories of foreign people.
Little interest.
Now, as you can see, 10% don't give a damn. About 20%, a little interested. Now actually look at that. Now, greatly interested is about, these are interesting numbers about learning about other people from around the world. And then let's see how it breaks down in terms of interest. So here we get into the whole LGBTQ interest in history, which, is really a new phenomenon, frankly. So is women's history. So is the valorization of ethnic minority and racial history.
Founding fathers there.
Yeah, founding fathers high. Too much emphasis on the founding fathers. That's too much.
Wow.
But about right. Now, see, it's interesting.
But Jim.
Yeah.
Jim. I mean, we always do this as Americans, like we're some type of anomaly. because it produces sort of a global humor, because there's sort of an antecedent sense that we're unique in how sort of, dumb, lumbering whatevers that we are. But if you look at, I put one in for France, if you do cultural surveys all over the world, I mean, people don't know their constitutions in their countries. They don't sit around and read this stuff. They watch TV and are consumed by modern media the same way. They have obviously idiosyncrasies given how developed their media markets are. Places like South Korea that are even more sophisticated than we are, they have even lower connection to history and so on. So I mean, I just think, we can do this as a sort of a theatrical exercise, that we're sort of special in how ignorant or unaware or naive or whatever. But if you start, if you really did a comparative survey across 50 or 100 countries, you're just not going to see a lot that's too different, across these populations.
Ted,
I have to.
what do you say about Japanese?
I think that most of the world is like this.
Right.
No, that's not true.
In one way, no, I said most of the world, not all of it. There are a lot of countries that are doing a lot better than us. But if you look at the majority of the world's population, they don't know history, or they know only the history that they're being told.
Because no one likes history. I mean, let's be blunt. Like, look in your lives. How many nerds like us do you know in your life?
Well,
no, I'm really serious.
We gather together on Sunday nights. That's what we do.
Always, Aaron, you always
We're not
nerd.
no nerds.
I don't consider myself a nerd, but anyway,
come on, seriously.
No, hell no.
Jim's a jock.
You got like 500 books. You got a storage building with a set of books.
Well,
that's not the nerd. What's a nerd?
Anyway, you're also talking. Yeah, you're right. Jim is a jock. That's correct. And anyway,
it's not an insult. It's just pointing out that everyone can be a nerd in their field.
No. See, to my problem with the lack of knowledge, and you're right. You're right. It's sort of a cheap target to do this. I mean, here's another little cheap target. Students have never known history. These are all these studies that were done. Oh, this was hilarious. This is done 1943. So only 22% of American students had mastered enough history in their high school days to identify two contributions made by Lincoln to this country. Now, we know that one of the things coming out of World War II, for a whole variety of reasons, was a tremendous interest in the Civil War. People forget that Lee's Lieutenants by Douglas Southall Freeman was a bestseller in World War II. And it's still a great book to read. I read it when I was a kid. But all these different things about, lack of knowledge. The problem I have with this is this actually affects policy and affects the knowledge of dealing with other parts of the world, because it actually is a national security threat as far as I'm concerned, because the fact that Americans pride themselves on being, compared to Europeans, the issue of learning other languages has actually deteriorated in the United States in the past.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a function of us having a massive contiguous space. It's like saying, oh, people in the Euros don't learn a lot of other languages. Well, because if they know Russian, that's their continuity language, right? If you're in Europe and you live in Belgium or the Netherlands, I mean, you're going to be interfaced on half a dozen different sides with other states that have other languages.
Yeah, that's true. But then we have the presumption of being the exceptional state in the world's greatest power, and then you have this institutionalized stress on essentially cultural ignorance in our educational systems, and so that contradicts itself. It's behooving on us as Americans to have broad understandings about the rest of the world, and I blame it on the individuals who steward our public schools and our whole educational system, and who fight against this. This is the kind of fights we've been seeing in the educational systems of the country for decades.
Jim,
there's nothing new in it.
You hit something on the head, probably unintentionally, but you did something, hit the nail on the head, because it's not so much America's ignorance about history. It's or anybody else's, any other country's ignorance about history. What seems to make America not unique, but in the in a distinct minority there, is America's arrogance about their ignorance.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Very true, Michael. Well said. Well said. And look at these ridiculous fights that people are having about the real part of American history is indeed integrated to slavery. So, like, to sit there and watch these battles going on because the Republican Party wants to win back the suburban mobs that they lost under El Schmucko president, Mr. Trump, is like amazing to me. Amazing to me.
Well,
and
well, wait a minute. Wait. I was educated in Australia and England as well.
Well, you don't.
And I remember. I can count though. I can count up to give me a number. I can count to it.
You're trained in an openly imperialist education system.
Well, that's why the Queen is still alive. You've still got a chance if she.
Well, we
if
got
she's
rid of her.
willing to-
We got rid of her. Go on.
You can go back if you want. You just have to, sign the coupon, and why America should be part of Britain again. But seriously though, folks, it's like when I was growing up, socialism was the thing it's the narrative that you teach youngsters. And, it's finite. You can't do the whole 9 yards. You can only do a given amount. And if you create something that completely trounces the prior understanding of what the narrative was, that's well and good, you can argue. But unfortunately, everybody goes their own separate direction, which is what's happened here. Whereas if, say, you go to Russia or China, there's one narrative, and you better learn that narrative, and it's the God honest truth. Now, obviously, we've got options here. We can go to the Wikipedia, we can go to many, as that graph pointed out, we can go to different sources for our information. But there is something to be said for a narrative that is unifying, and that we don't have at the moment. Now, what it should be, that, you were just saying that, Jim, it's like you blame the education authorities as to what it ought to be. I don't know what it ought to be. I mean, I'm not sure at all, but it can only be, it's a finite amount. You can only teach young people in the limited time they've got in high schools to learn only a limited amount. And that narrative has to be strong, and it has to bind.
But Frank, I mean, we don't have, no, even before it's accurate or not, we don't have institutions like, and the world is losing these, not everywhere, but at different speeds, where, I mean, some places are extremely homogeneous, not just ethnically or racially, but homogeneous in their institutions. So this change will be slower. But in places that are very dynamic, which in a country as large as ours, there's like 30 little countries here, that you have the common space now is not what the old institutions were, whether they were good or bad. The common space now are these new institutions, which are social media, which are people's sort of individual narcissism and sort of self-promotion. There's sort of everyone's got their own, it's kind of the me to the 100th degree, in both the psychological sphere, physical, everything else. And so I don't see how, when you look at kids and their want or need or desire to learn history, you see about the same small percentage of the population as you've seen in prior generations that actually care about history. So those, that group of 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe 5%. It's pretty standard, right? You don't get huge switches. I mean, you obviously had a special case in 1930s, 40s, and early 50s, but once things normalized, people just, they don't gravitate towards what you might call historical or, let's say social or world systems knowledge. For most people, that's like physics. I mean, it really is. For stuff that's easy for us, it's not easy for for people. It just isn't.
Euclidean geometry versus new math. I mean, there's a whole generation of Americans that don't know how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide with the new math. That's certainly true. I've had them in my classes. Students have never learned how to add, subtract properly. They can't make a chart because they never learned math. That was
That's
10
right.
years ago, and they just never. No, So anyway, that's a whole different.
Well,
thing.
no. Look, when all the debates, look, you come from the state of California, and
Yeah.
when I was a teenager,
I live in New Jersey, but I come
but
from
you
there,
grew
yeah.
up. You grew up and went.
I grew up. I
school.
went to
Yeah,
school
you went,
there.
you went to high school,
everything.
and your state had before Proposition 13
Yep.
the enviable public educational system of the United States. Frankly,
That's right. And even to be
Um,
honest, even after that, for about a decade, because Prop 13. So I mean, the big thing about Prop 13 is that it solved a stagflation problem, which was basically everyone on this phone that's over 65 was losing, if they didn't have any real money, was losing their house in California because property taxes quadrupled over 15 years. And so
Right.
Prop 13 went in to save their housing, basically. And
Right.
but it took about a decade for that funding shortfall to start changing. And then the state never really, and the state got lazy, to be blunt. I mean, just like you've seen SUNY in the state of New York get lazy. It's so, but I do
They
think
shifted it to prisons.
Exactly.
I mean, kind of, but it's bigger than that.
No, not kind of. Look at the money flow. They
No, I
shifted
know, but
the money
but you
to
don't have
prisons.
somebody. No, come on, Joe. You don't have someone who sits on the education state senate committee, who's then says, "Let's shift the money to prisons." I mean, that's not how it actually
see,
works.
The point that Daryl makes is that, remember in the state of New York, which is different in California, there was this whole deliberate reduction for all sorts of political reasons.
I get that.
And there are contracts that a lot of states
And
have
then-
with the private prisons that guarantee that they have to have X number of prisoners for their profit.
But also you had the 3 strikes you're out. You had the war on drugs. You had
Look, I mean, yes, but
I mean-
that does not explain why you had an explosion of SUNYs or UC schools, but then you wound up getting a stabilization as the institutional power behind each of those, which is a combination of and I'm not saying this is always the case, but in these cases, I think it is, where the institutional power of those organizations that ran those schools basically starts dictating their own market, right? And if you have more SUNYs or more UC schools, you are creating a differentiated demand, which lowers the price. And that's not a good thing for their economic model. And it's why you haven't had another UC you had one UC and they won't promote it in California in the last 30 years.
Well, okay, but in the state of New York, when I graduated from high school, you could go to a SUNY school, City College, for tuition free.
Yeah, I know conservative professors.
It just
system who tell me that was a mistake.
But let me get back to the history issue, and that was, I covered as a journalist the National Historical Standards debate when it broke out, and it was quite an amazing debate to watch because the same kind of arguments going on now. Oh my God, they don't include Robert E. Lee. I said, yeah, that militaristic part of me felt like every kid should know about Robert E. Lee, but at the same time, I remember talking to the guys who created the curriculum, and they were all a bunch of new left historians. So, like that. I mean, they're sort of amusing.
That is true.
They never really got into the inners, but they were all brilliant historians, and their whole thing was to have critical thinking. All right, and which I totally agree with. History can be used to create critical thinking, and not just simply analyze problems with sort of a set piece answer, and that's where history can be quite stimulating, and that's frankly what we're engaging in when we do this, because we're using our various pools of knowledge about history and operations, et cetera, to try to make sense of something that we really are not sitting there in the CIA or in the Moscow getting all the intel, which we know from history is even in terms of decision makers flawed. Okay?
Yeah, but that's us. We're talking about youngsters coming up through.
That's
high school.
right.
I mean, you've only got a limited time, and to give them the option of questioning just about everything is ludicrous. Actually, I mean, they need to have a central theme that says this is the truth, this is what happened.
Right.
This is what it was in the beginning, and this is what it is at
Right,
the
but
moment.
No, but if you look at a play like History Boys,
Frank,
I mean, History Boys touched on it. It's got to be fun. Whatever you're doing,
That's right.
it has
Yeah,
to be
exactly
fun.
right.
And then they become curious. And if they become curious, they'll
Right.
figure it out. But
Right,
you can't
right.
give. There's no list of things they have to memorize. That was the mistake of the people. You know, what's his name? The biography of Kennedy, The 1,000 Days. He made a list of all the things that should be in a historical book.
Schlesinger.
Arthur Schlesinger. I couldn't come up with it. I asked him. He came and visited William Patterson, and I asked him. I said, do you know about William Patterson? How the name of the university got there? He didn't know that. He didn't know that William Patterson was a Supreme Court justice. He didn't know that he was this is Arthur Schlesinger Jr. I wasn't saying he's stupid. I'm not saying that, but I was kind of shocked. I was embarrassed because I caught him, you know, that he didn't understand that that's where the New Jersey Compromise came from. That guy. And that's why we named the city after him. You know,
Well, he did
That's
after
right.
all write his claim to fame was the history of the New Deal. But so
And his history.
No, I'm not saying it was not a
history
great
of
story. I'm
Jackson
not saying that.
and
I'm saying you didn't know everything, and you're never gonna know everything.
That's
all.
right.
right, very true.
I have to take issue
But it
with
still
you
needs to
on-
be priorities. There
on
needs to be.
words said. You said that history has to be made fun. I don't think fun is the operative word.
I mean, the process of what
Interesting.
if you call it critical sense, if you call it critical theory of critical thinking, everybody turns it off right there. So I mean, I don't mean the subject has to be fun. Slavery is not fun. Hanging people is not fun. Revolutions might even not be fun, though they may be fun if you're part. And so for some people, if they're rebelling against what was unjust to them. But what I meant is you have to be interesting. You have to engage the student, and that's the whole idea.
Right,
That's
exactly.
we care about now, but you and I weren't trained that way. And I had to learn all these. I remember fighting with my elementary school 6th grade teacher. I said that she asked what was the most northern colony, and I said Massachusetts. And she looked at me and said, "No, that's wrong." I said, "No, it's Massachusetts because of Maine, right?" And so I was right, but she was wrong. But you know, that's
Right,
we
'cause
had
Maine wasn't
one
a
answer to
colony
one
back
question. Instead
Well-
of saying, "Oh yes, Ted, that was a smart idea," or "Teddy, that was a good idea." She had to be right because that's her status.
Look, when I was in third grade, I was forced to participate in air raid drills.
We all did.
And I finally put my foot down. I said, my father is in Korea, and his comment about participating in air raid drills is you can kiss your ass goodbye. And I remember telling that to the 3rd grade teacher, and she was like, "What'd you say?" I said, "Yeah, my dad said he's going to drive up in a Jeep and pick me up when he comes back from Korea, and he's going to tell you that you can kiss your ass goodbye if you have a nuclear war." And they brought my mother in.
Really?
Because then I
But
stopped
they were
participating.
right.
They
I can
brought
see
my mother
little
in. They
Jim
brought
doing
my
that.
mother in. I said, I'm not gonna. This is ridiculous. Because by then I had watched all the sci-fi movies about nuclear war. So I said, what?
I know, but Jim,
Big
they
I'm gonna
were
turn
right.
into an ant. A big ant is gonna come get me. You know.
I know, but Jim,
Yeah,
they were right.
Yeah, have you
I don't
have you
know. What
guys
are we
seen
talking
the New York City ad now about
Yeah, I just
how
saw
we
it.
should prepare for nuclear war? Close, be inside when the nuke
All right.
goes.
Well,
There's a problem here, and one problem is that what we're not facing the fact is we're in a generation now that's a bit spoiled. And to be quite honest, we were a bit spoiled also. Okay, the generation that went through the Depression, fought in the war, or was on the home front during the war, in other words, struggling, you can't call them spoiled. Even if they started out spoiled before the Depression, you can't really call them spoiled. Now, everybody thinks that they can have it their way. That's the new thing. You can have it your way. You can have 600 channels, even though there's only 4 things among the 600 that are worth watching. You can have whatever you want on the menu.
that's the free market.
Well, it may be the free market, but what I'm trying to say is right now people are used to be having things their own way.
Well,
And that educates people.
all right.
much
As
different.
I always say to you, Michael, there's the Canadian border looming in front of us to the north. Anyway.
It's not looming in front of me. It's inviting me.
Beckoning.
Okay.
All right. Well,
you
on that
guys,
note,
it's looming.
all right. It's on that note.
inviting.
On that note, since we've
Hey,
traveled
Jim, I was
afar
wondering
from
if I
the
should
war in the
share
Ukraine. No,
share
not,
with our
no, that's
massive
fine.
viewers
Yeah,
the
right.
NIMAT
Exactly.
schedule for the fall.
That's all right. We'll do that another time. All right. Anyway, I'd like to thank everybody tonight for participating in our update on the Ukraine. We got a little far afield, but it was fun, and we'll return to this in the next few days and keep track of it. Thank you so much. I want to thank Aaron Reyes, Alex Stavropoulos, Michael Jankowicz, Ted Cook, Daryl McPherson, Frank Radford. I believe we lost Mark.
We had
Whitman.
Mark with
We had Brandon come in for a while. But anyway,
Thank
stay
you.
tuned. We'll return to this subject, this terrible subject, to discuss it.
Jim, did Mark say anything? Because
No, he didn't. Yes, he did
Maybe he's
actually.
the problem.